On behalf of the designated federal officer, Katie Thompson, and in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, this advisory committee meeting is open to the public. Notice of the meeting was published in the Federal Register on February 28, 2024. Members of the public may address the committee with prior approval of the chair. This should be arranged in advance. Only appointed members of the advisory committee may vote on any matter brought to a vote by the chair. The public may present written material to the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee at any time. I'll just briefly go over the agenda very quick. We'll just have some opening remarks by our host, the designated federal officer and our chair. We have two presentations in the first half of the meeting. The Task Group 17 will present their recommendations on consensus standards, and Task Group 16 will provide their recommendations on innovation and infrastructure investments. We'll take a short break. We have a couple of information updates. First will be a remote identification implementation update and an Innovate 28 update as well. Then the next agenda item will be a presentation of two new taskings from the FAA to the advisory committee. And then we'll do some new business and talk about possible future agenda topics. And then we'll close the meeting with some final remarks. In your ebook that was distributed prior to the meeting, the minutes from the August 23rd, 2023 meeting were included in the ebook. And at this time, I'd like to request a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the August 23rd, 2023 AAAC meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the motion to approve the minutes from the August 23rd, 2023 AAAC meeting? Hearing no objections, the motion is passed to approve the minutes. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our host for today's meeting, Jeffrey Vincent, the Executive Director for the UAS Integration Division. Jeffrey?
Good afternoon. I just want to say welcome to everyone, and certainly appreciate the participation that we have today. I see we have a very large crowd here in the room, and also a pretty large crowd on screen, so we certainly appreciate that. I then want to take this opportunity to introduce and announce that we now have a new permanent executive director in AUS, Ms. Angela McCullough. Angela has over 30 years of federal experience, to include being a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and she has served across various lines of business here in the FAA. Her experience and background will be a welcome addition to the AUS organization. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our DFO for many remarks.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Those of you who are in the room and joining us virtually. It's always great to convene this group and talk about how we advance aviation in this space. I also want to say I recognize how busy your schedules are and how challenging it can be to bring this group together, but I do think we have really important discussions, and we identify the critical path to moving us all forward. So thank you for the time that you dedicate. One very big change since we last met is that we have a unanimously confirmed administrator, Mike Whitaker. I think probably all of you know him. If you don't, I don't know where you've been. Welcome to the aviation world. But we're really excited to have him here. He's committed to serving a 5-year term, and it is really great for those of us who are politicals to have his support, but also I think for the career talent here at the FAA to have that constant, stable senior leadership at the top who can work with us to advance all of our priorities and prepare us for the NASA 2040. I think most of you probably know that Mike, during the time that he was outside FAA, was at Hyundai working on drones, and then at Supernal, related to Hyundai, working on advanced air mobility. So he's very deep expertise on what this new industry, the opportunities that it offers, the challenges that we need to manage as we move forward responsibly, but really the possibilities of providing service to all sorts of communities all over the country, all over the world, in a way that is energy efficient, quieter, can move in and out in ways that commercial aircraft haven't always been able to do. So he's as excited, I think, as all of us are. He has made it clear, and it won't surprise any of us, that safety remains the priority of this agency in everything we do. We don't just say it, it animates who we are and how we think. And I know that that's the way that all of you in this room and online operate as well. So continue to keep that at the forefront of our minds as we work forward to solve some of these challenges and create make the possible a reality for today. So today we're going to have a couple of briefings from the FAA team. As Gary mentioned, one will be on remote ID. As you know, back in the fall, we paused our enforcement of remote ID to give the industry more time to implement the requirements, and we are now at the point where we will begin enforcement. It's not going to be, someone standing at a stop sign looking for everybody going by who might not be in compliance, but where there is a notable non-compliance, we will be taking action. And it's important to get the word out that remote ID is a critical component of our overall ability to integrate drones at scale into the NAS and make sure that we can communicate with other types of aircraft using the airspace. Again, we believe this rule will increase accountability in the NAS, allowing for more complex and more volume of drones in the future. So please do what you can to encourage compliance among the drone community. All of you are extraordinarily well plugged in, and every bit of support you can offer us is greatly appreciated. And again, you'll be hearing more about remote ID from our flight standards team later in the meeting. When it comes to advanced air mobility, we have been working on a number of different fronts, and we're glad that Jessica's and Angie is able to join us today. We've taken a whole of agency, well, two things really. A whole of the agency approach to making sure we've identified the range of issues that need to be addressed, and that everybody across the FAA who has equities or interest in that understands how we're approaching those, who's responsible for moving things forward. So we're collaborating and coordinating as opposed to doing it in sometimes a typical FAA approach of being more siloed. We're also working across the federal government, and DOT's leading this to make sure we're working with our federal agency partners so that we can move forward in lockstep together and again understand the issues and what the opportunities are for moving forward. But one of the things that we did last year was release our Innovate 28 implementation plan, which supports the introduction and increasing the scale and automation of AAM operations and integration with other aircraft in the NAS. And again, we seek to define the safest and most efficient routes while minimizing the impact to air traffic facilities and area residents that are in the impacted areas. We believe that this is a critical first step to broader integration, and the plan also lays out the longer term roadmap so you can see, if you haven't already, where we plan to go. You'll get an update on Innovate a little bit later today. One other thing I'd like to highlight for the group is we're really excited to be working with several drone operators and UAS traffic management service providers through the UTM key site operational evaluation in North Texas. Industry is preparing to stand up UTM services to manage unmanned aircraft collision risk among multiple drone operators in that region. The functions have been studied and tested by NASA and the FAA since 2015, and FAA began coordinating with industry last fall. We've really seen some exciting progress. This too is a critical first step in expanding UTM services into broader regions and ultimately across the country as an opportunity or in support of scaling. So the work that's currently being done will help FAA validate the use of UTM to mitigate unmanned aircraft collision risk for beyond visual line of operations, which is obviously a key element of what we're working on. Again, appreciate your continued support, your contributions. This is a safe space to have open, honest, candid debates. It's important that we have those debates in order to identify the opportunities and the challenges that we need to continue to manage. Good opportunity to learn from each other, and looking forward to a lively discussion. For that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Well, thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone, both here live and on virtually. You can't see you on the screen, but thank you guys for joining us as well. I will say this. It's nothing like being in person. It's really good to see faces smiling. We had COVID for 2.5 years, and it seems like it was only yesterday when that was taking place. So just first, I want to say thank you, Katie. We are likewise thrilled, with the appointment of this Administrator Whitaker being a permanent director, and all the active workers are fantastic. There's a sense of permanency that really gives momentum to the team. So congratulations to you, Jeffrey. Thank you as well. We never want to go without thanking Gary for all of this vaccine coordination and collaboration along with all the other teammates to make all this stuff possible. So thank you. We got a lot of great speakers today, so I'm excited about that. I really want to say thank you to our team leaders for task groups 16 and 17 and all the team members for some great recommendations. I'm really excited. And as I was thinking about the recommendations you'll hear today, and I was thinking about Katie, the numerous things that the FAA is moving with and have brought forward, and you think about our public-private partnership, which really is what this diverse stakeholders represents. Since 2016, we have had the opportunity to bring forth ideas and recommendations which are contributing to real activity that's taking place today. And sometimes we just get caught up in the moment. Okay, we're showing up, etc. But the reality is, and you'll hear this today, the very thoughts that we're sharing are going to eventually translate into actions. And I know everyone wants to go a lot faster, but it's way back in the day. And the work that first opened up, the first only budget, recommissioned as the Advanced Aviation Committee. He said that the pace of our activity will be centered around public acceptance and public trust. So getting to your point about safety and all the stakeholders coming together to make sure that we're looking at everything, so we cover those blind spots, every different stakeholder group, so we collectively can advance the industry. I'm just very honored and humbled to be part of that, this team. As FAA reauthorization is around the corner, so we believe, fingers crossed, there's going to be a lot of momentum that goes along with it, right? Resources, etc., that we're going to be able to participate in. When I think about Innovate 28, which is right around the corner, we'll hear an update from here today. We're going to be part of that activity, and I think, especially if you hear about some of the report stuff and the team's recommending, you're going to see how our recommendations are going to help drive positive change. There's going to be a great task we have to get later, and Gary and Katie has shared it with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about AI and we talk a lot about automation, but I'm really excited because when you think about generative AI in particular, and I'm not sure if any guys use Copilot on Blink, but it's pretty amazing in terms of how you can that tool to assist. Think about the possibilities on how we can enhance safety, how we can enhance security, how we can enhance operation efficiencies when we have the right stakeholders making sure that those things are in place to be safe. We're going to have the opportunity to be part of that conversation. And that's amazing that the administrator trusts us to be connected. So I'm excited about today. Really looking forward to the opportunity to listen and learn from all the feedback that the team is going to bring forward. And with that, we will look to move forward. So at this time, we'll go on to the formal part of our agenda. And our first presentation is going to be from Task Group 17. At the August AAAC meeting, FAA tasked us to provide recommendations on consensus standards. So, and then again, Joe and the NRTA Technologies and his team are going to present their recommendations. And I got to tell you, as the task groups are working, I'll check in from time to time, but I really try to stay away and let the team do the work. But they keep you posted on activity, and I am just so grateful. Saw the amount of work that this team put in to these recommendations. You were very much appreciative of what we're about to do. So, with that, thank you, sir, and we'll turn over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Houston, for the introduction. LPFA and all the stakeholders, Jeffrey and the team, Kat, Kitty and others for giving us the opportunity to come here and present what the team has been working on for the past many months actually. A lot of hard work. I know this is just the culmination, but a lot of hard work has gone in behind the scenes, and I have some of my team members that work with me on this, and if you don't mind, I'll actually invite them to step in because it's best that you hear from them versus just me being the face here, because a lot of good work went in there. I also would like to thank Task Group 16 for allowing us to swap the agenda and allowing us to go first. Unfortunately, some of our team members have a flight to catch, so appreciate the flexibility. So once again, I'm Amit Ganj, so if you can go to the next slide, please. So the tasking that was provided to us was to make recommendations on prioritizing the development and harmonization around consensus standards and from an industry perspective. And the goal was that these recommendations will support FAA's new entrant certification process. So that was a high level, 10,000 foot level view. So we tried to decompose it. All right, so there are a lot of people that signed up for it, but there was a core group of folks that actually rolled up their sleeves and did a lot of work. So I wanted to recognize them. So we have Catherine Cahill, and most of them couldn't be here in the room, so they have joined virtually, but they're all on the Zoom, so you get to see them. So Catherine Cahill from Alaska, Dallas Brooks from Wing, Scott Campbell from Airbus, and Joey Rios from NASA. So we had diverse perspectives from an OEM point of view, from technology, airspace management point of view, from an operational point of view. So we tried to bring all those aspects in as we were working on these recommendations. Next slide, please. So if we talk about what the core principles were, so when we started this work, before us going down and just marching ahead, we came up with an outline and a scope of how we were going to approach it, and we actually sent it back to FAA to get the FAA agreement that this is the right approach. This is what they want us to do with it. But the last thing we wanted to do is come today and present something that was totally off base. So we had some key principles that we outlined that we were going to follow. So the first one was priority. The standards should be prioritized in terms of their potential to positively impact safety and the integration of not just small UAS, AM as well. And I know we have the other group that's going to talk about vertiports and advanced air mobility. The other one was harmonization. How do we create harmonization? Because these are all new entrants, but there are differences. We acknowledge that, but there are similarities as well. So how can we build a common framework that we can build from and leverage the commonality and then have the delta increments? And also the other aspect was the level of maturity. The US work, small US work has been going on for many years now, and AM is coming afterwards. So do we really want to hold up the small drone industry while the AM is evolving, or should we do a staggered approach? So factoring the maturity level of both areas, the small US, and you'll see those recommendations as we go through the subsequent slides. The last aspect was innovation and growth, that recognizing that new entrants bring new concepts which traditional aviation players may not have been used to, and paradigms may change. So having an open mind and encouraging us to build systems that leverage open standards and interoperable standards that allow, because if you have standardized based approach versus black box approaches, it spurs innovation and leverages billions of dollars of R&D money that industry puts in. One of the key things we did was we looked at the 8060.A, the SRM policy that FAA put out for hazards and the corresponding mitigations, and we used it as a framework. We said, okay, this work has already been done. FAA has published it, so let's see if we can use that as a framework. And so as we go through the rest of the slides, you'll see us looking at those categories of hazards and their corresponding mitigations, and now then translating that to what impacts does it have on digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure needs, and what are the recommendations, and then eventually we'll talk about some grouping. Next slide, please. So I already touched on this a little bit. So we tried to identify the similarities between the UAS and UAM. We did realize, however, there are differences because of the level of maturity. The risk profiles are different. A small drone can land everywhere, and eVTOL cannot land there just about anywhere. The variations in the aircraft science, the potential for whether it's piloted or, because as we hear from a lot of industry players, a lot of the initial eVTOL operations, AM operations will be optionally or piloted. So it has impacts from the readiness level, maturity, and the regulatory approval side as well. Next slide. We touched on this, differing risk profiles, industry maturity, and readiness. We can skip to the next slide, please. Oh, the other aspect that we considered was leveraging US standards for maturity. So there's a lot more maturity in the small US segment because the work has been going on for many years compared to the AM. So some of those standards already exist, have been published, have been used as means of compliance, not just in US, but in Europe for other use-based deployments as well. So how can we leverage those and other relevant standards? And alignment in principles and approaching, we realize there are differences, but if we build the framework in such a way that the underlying principles stay the same, it's easier for us to plug in AM and other specific requirements that we discover as we continue marching down. Next slide. So now's the fun part. So recommendations. So what we did was we grouped the recommendations because for those of you who are familiar with 8060.68, the Annex B and Appendix B and C are pretty big. So Appendix B, the table by itself, has a lot of hazards and the potential mitigations. So we went through as a group, we spent weeks and months kind of going through it, looking at each aspect and coming up with recommendations for each of the potential hazards and their mitigations. And then what we ended up doing is looking at grouping them because it's not practical to have so many recommendations. So we created some top level groups and we came up with some color coding. We came up with blue, purple, and orange. It doesn't have to be that. We can change those colors, but we just came up with 3 colors. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So here are the 3 colors. We had the blue, which were operator best practices. Purple was focused on vehicle and vehicle-related technologies and standards. And the last one was orange, which is maturation, acceptance, and establishment of third-party digital services, whether it's supplementary data services providers or UTM kind of services. They were grouped in the third one. So on the right-hand side, if you can see, I can't read at this distance, but you will have Kathy. So Kathy, I'll invite Kathy to join in and she'll talk about what recommendations we came up in and explain our approach and how we group them in particular areas, buckets, and present that. Then I'll hand off to Dallas Brooks. He'll step in and he'll talk about vehicle and vehicle related from an aircraft point of view. And then I'll invite Scott and Joey at the end to talk about how we looked in terms of digital services and third-party services and UTM services and how they come into play and what are the needs from a standardization and harmonization point of view. With that, if I can ask Kathy to be unmuted. Kathy.
I am.
All right, perfect. Kathy, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, so next slide, please. So when we went through the 8040.6A, one of the things we did is we went ahead and prioritized each particular hazard and the mitigation, and we determined whether it happened to be something that was critical or something that was, it might be nice to have something, and also, what level of impact was there on it. So we do have an entire spreadsheet of 8040.6A that happens to have all of our rankings. As Amit said, what we did though is we really brought it down to some top level common themes that we found throughout. So in terms of the operators' best practices, this was a group that crossed multiple different hazard categories inside 8040.6A. But it was a case of, you saw a common theme again and again. So one of the key things here is in terms of the problem statement is we were finding that operators' lack of qualification and experience increases the operational risk. For everybody who's flown a drone, we know this is a no duh, but it's something that still we need to remind folks who haven't been in the industry. So we are looking at operators with insufficient qualifications or experience, and really the absence of validated operational procedures, lack of adherence to safety standards, and potential human errors that contribute to increased risks. posing threats to aircraft infrastructure and personnel. So really, what can we do in terms of mitigating these hazards? Well, next slide, please. What we really found is that we need to enhance the operator qualifications and documentation practices. So by implementing standards, checklists, manuals, we really do bring the operators to a level where they can operate as qualified, safe professionals. So the recommendations here in blue all address this. They really are looking at setting up the procedures, making it easy for people to follow, and leveraging that best practice in terms of manuals and checklists. Next slide, please. So these particular recommendations came out of specific lines in the 8040.6a. So you would have a hazard classification, you would come up with a potential mitigation, and then you would develop what the recommendation should be from that one. So these all are addressed by different lines in our 8040.6 spreadsheet. And so you'll see that there are common themes through them. We didn't quite clump them because we don't want to lose some of the nuances here. So on these operational best practices, it really is develop, validate, and implement standardized operational procedures vetted by experienced individuals. Utilize the manufacturer's checklist or develop own for pre-flight checks. Refer to existing operator best practices for pre-flight checks. You'll notice a theme here. Multiple things are saying we need to do pre-flight checks. We really need to look at best practices. We need to use the expertise of the people who already do this. Implement and enforce standards for crew fitness to operate, identify and standardize roles, key roles for operators and service suppliers, mitigate diurnal risks by accounting for time of day and employing visibility enhancing measures, and raise awareness of mid-collision risks at low altitudes and establish detection techniques. All of these are operational best practices. Next slide, please. The next grouping we found focused on training. So really it is making sure that your operators receive training on these and they receive statements of qualification for specific aircraft types, categories, and configurations. All of the teams that fly aircraft know it's very different flying a multi-copter from a fixed wing. So being able to be trained on those aircraft and showing that you have that training on that configuration could be very important. And of course, certifications of training, flight logs, emergency procedures for maintaining safe operations. The training should be provided by experienced personnel. Currency checks. You know, those of you who are traditional pilots, you know about the value of these. And making sure that the intervals are tailored based on the experience. And you do some human factor training to make sure that the crews can identify errors and respond appropriately. And of course, doing crew resource management training and making sure everybody adheres to operations manual, which leads us to the next point. Next slide, please. Manuals. All of us know manuals are very, very valuable. So really developing good manuals that bring in best operating procedures, you maintain and publish the steps for safe operations, and you make sure your people are following them. And you encourage the creation of operator manuals and checklists for proper documentation. People may think it's a simple little aircraft, I can just go fly it, but the reality is it is an aircraft, and you need to make sure that you are doing best practices here. Emergency procedures, really it comes down to establishing the procedures so you can recover from any emergency, technical issues, whether it depends on the operation type, being able to enhance protocols to avoid mid-air collisions. All of those things really need to be documented and people need to understand how to do them. And lastly, really we wanted to operate ASTM F3178-16, the standard practice for operational risk assessment to assess air, ground, and risk. People aren't familiar with what this is and the value of having a standard to do that risk assessment and really quantify what the risks of your operation are. So with that, that covers the operator best practices, and I'm handing it over to Dallas to deal with vehicles.
Thanks.
Dallas, before you go in, so one thing I wanted to mention, which I forgot to mention, so if you look at here the groupings with blue, purple, and orange, so one of the things we realized in certain cases, we don't need standards. So it's not because the tasking was to come up with standards. What we realized is we don't need standards for everything. In certain cases, it's just best practices that already exist or may need to be added to. So that's a lot of those aspects fall into the blue category as well. So that was the point I wanted to make. Dallas, back to you, sir.
A fantastic segue, Amit, because I was going to make the exact same comment. That was a great deal of our discussion in this group. For those of you in the audience, that it's quite easy to throw everything over the fence to standards organizations and say, you guys tell us. But they're excellent examples where the FAA has done very solid work and avoided the need to go through a 2-year standard effort. I'll use the CMD process under 44007 as a great example of them jumping straight to the answer and doing a fantastic job that was not only ensuring safety, but responsive to the industry. So great point there. I guess we're on the next slide.
Dallas, we can't see you. Did you turn off your camera?
Yeah, this is the weirdest thing. Halfway through, I was on and then I wasn't. If I uncheck virtual background, I can do this if that helps.
Yeah, that's
But when I check virtual background fully, I go away. So
it's magic.
all right. You asked for it. If you wanted to see this face, it's. All right. I'm still showing the last slide, I think. Oh, here we go. No, top level part. So lack of consistent standards for U.S. performance and environmental adaptability. Again, that sounds like a very broad sort of statement about standards, but in reality, we do narrow this down going forward into some specific areas that we find are important. But the top level problem statement here sort of reflects truths about any standards in any industry, right? There's certain things that you need. You need metrics, you need the playbook, you need to be able to demonstrate compliance, and that way everyone understands what level all of the players are on and what to expect from each other as we all work together in an integrated environment. So next slide. All right, comprehensive performance and environmental standards. So this is sort of split into two things. One is vehicle performance and the other is environmental. Talk about both of these things. Some great examples here are when you're operating in varying environments, right? Understanding the ground terrain, the obstacles, all the things that you might be facing as you're flying, particularly BVLOS, becomes more critical, right? And so where you get that information from, what fidelity that information is presented at, and the reliability and your assurance that it's always going to be accurate is really, really important. We talked about this in the ARC as well. So from a BVLOS perspective, companies like Wing and Amazon and Zipline, we have access to some really high fidelity and very, very current information, but not everybody does. And so setting those kinds of thresholds for this is what the level of acceptability is, minimum for BVLOS operations, is an important threshold. And then the lack of consistent criteria for hazard mitigation. Again, we're talking specifically in the realm of vehicle-related technologies, not environmental hazards or hazards from other players, but specifically on the vehicle. And we'll talk about specifics here in just a second. Next slide. Here we go. All right, emergency mitigation. There's several things here. I'm going to try not to read all of them through, but the first few are about making sure that organizations are appropriately credited for making their aircraft safer. And there's lots of ways to do that, right? We specifically express it in terms of reduced kinetic energy at impact or effective kinetic energy at impact. And so if you're using either frangible materials or modular designs or parachutes, anything that induces additional drag, anything that ensures that it would reduce the impact of a collision with not only another aircraft, but with people and property on the ground. All of those things should be creditable when you're developing your risk assessment, getting back to the F3176 that Kathy was talking about, which is currently under review and update at ASTM. So those things need to be, we need to have basically a playbook on how to make sure we apply the appropriate amount of credit so we can plug that into the risk assessments that should be done in order to move forward. When we talk about flying in a BVLOS environment, we also talk about the services that are available. in either a UTM sort of space or otherwise, any information that you're getting to make sure that you're flying as safely as possible. You need to know the quality of that information. You need to know latency associated with that information. You need to know when it's out or when it's degraded. And so standards for that becomes more and more important. I know the FAA has been focusing on that more and more lately, and that there's a desire on both industries and regulator side to find levels of acceptability that ensure the appropriate level of safety, right? Failure modes analysis, I think, and even emergency procedures, integrating those things into the aircraft design. There's a lot that can be done that will inherently make the aircraft safer from a design perspective. So ways to articulate that is something that we identified. And then just a simple, this is sort of a mom and apple pie, encourage compliance with airspace and operating regulations, using all the tools that are available to you in your environment. You know, in a mode CVAL, you know, ADS-B receivers become more valuable, VOs where they're appropriate, flight tracking applications, so you can do strategic deconfliction and tactical deconfliction by either holding aircraft on the ground or flying them appropriately. Next slide. And then environmental concerns, right? So we have an expert in extreme environmental operations. Kathy knows more about that than probably anyone for all her work in Alaska. But you can't just buy an aircraft off the shelf and plug it into an extreme environment and expect it to perform not only well or safe, right? Extreme cold, extreme heat, extreme wind, moisture, all of these things are massive degraders to the performance of a UA. And the performance you think you might get, you might not get at exactly the wrong time. So having a design and test standards for challenging environmental conditions are important, and they need to be flexible, right? So make sure you can size the craft to the task. And then finally, we have perform range tests for C2 equipment with its documented verification. I think we all have been sort of pounding on this drum from both the regulator and industry side for a while. So much is dependent on C2, and more will be dependent on C2 in a UTM style environment where we're doing dense operations. And so we all want to make sure that our links are reliable, that the information that they contain is reliable, and that latency is minimized. I think that's it for me, but check one more slide just in case.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Dallas. At this point, Scott, if you're there, Scott and Joey is there too. Yes. Thank you guys. So we just transition on to the orange color now. So here's the orange video.
Thanks, Amit. And Joey, thanks for your support on this too. So what this section is, this is talking more specifically about the USS and SDSP part of our UTM and UAS operational ecosystem, where in many ways we think about this and we think about as operations become more advanced. UTM is one of those tools in the toolbox that can be used to help mitigate risk. And our top level problem statement here is really targeted at the lack of standardization or just common understanding in how UTM type services can get operational credit and be a part of the hazard risk assessment. And we followed a similar approach here, going through the FAA 80. Actually, off the top of my head, I can't remember the number, but the document that we followed as a group to base this off of the hazard risk assessment. And so there is a lot of work that has been done in UTM, both in ASTM and also EuroK, in a variety of different standards. However, we do say that some gaps do remain. One of them that we call out specifically is in the digital representation of terrain and obstacle data, where a use case for this is if you think about concepts for sea shielded operations, for example. How do you ensure that the obstacles and the structures that you're going to shield your operations with are adequately represented in a digital way that is common and repeatable among all the different service providers? The other piece I've already mentioned, but is how do we move to a more unified and standardized process to have UTM services obtain really safety credit in mitigating hazards. And following from this, we'll go through our list of recommendations, but also wanted to kind of pause to give Joey a chance to give any additional context if he wants.
Yeah. Before Joey goes, we didn't have a chance to update this. The typo on the slide, it says UED 318, it's 318. So I sent the slides to FAA, and afterwards we realized it was a typo. So in case someone is jotting notes down. Joey.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of recognize a sub-theme that you'll see in this section related to what Dallas and Kathy mentioned earlier in terms of where the standardization has to happen or the state of the standardization. So this is one of those where the standards may exist, but we really need help in terms of recognizing for the credit, as Scott just mentioned. So I want to take a moment, I guess, to congratulate and kind of further encourage the work of the FAA on things like NTAP, the near-term approval process, where they're looking at how we're going to figure out to navigate this world of, you know, operators, service suppliers, and the regulator figuring out third-party services. So that'll be a sub-thing you see as Scott goes through. Thank you.
And don't forget that there is active work going on right now in the DFW area with 7 different UAS operators on a lot of that work that's basically implementing one of the most up-to-date ASTM standards that's governing UTM style operations. So there's good work going on there, but to Joe's point, there are lots of standards that are out there that just aren't current. And not through lack of effort, but just because things have improved so greatly. So we've got to keep that moving.
All right, thanks. We can probably go to the next slide. Okay, so just to start to go through the list of recommendations here. And so from a UTM service perspective, I think I won't necessarily read through these, but essentially, as we've said, that there's definitely a need for qualifying UTM services, but also, you know, I think at the level of the USS and STSB, there are you know, current ways to onboard providers, you know, for example, with Lance. However, when we get to, I think, the additional services that would be provided as part of a BV loss approval, there's a number of additional things that would need to be done. And so first recommendation is just to develop a standardized process for qualifying UTM services. And then along with that, it is standardizing how the services actually get operational safety credit. And I think an important aspect of this is that as we have a better understanding of how UTM services can be qualified and given safety credit, then that allows the consumers or the operational community to really understand the value of UTM as a tool in kind of the toolbox to mitigate the risk of an operation.
Scott, can I add
from a human, yeah, go ahead.
So to give an example of what Scott just mentioned, so if you look at what's happening at the Key site in Texas, so one of the services that's being used there is the strategic conflict detection. And as part of the ASTM work in 3548, we did a safety case analysis. There was a whole safety case analysis done to show how STD service actually adds to the safety of the operation. So I think that's what Scott is alluding to. So unless you get safety credit for these services, it doesn't add any value. Back to you.
Right, yeah, thanks, Amit. So from a human factor standpoint, one is that, especially when there is a human in the loop, so you have an operator, that if there are data exchanges and the state of the UTM system or any notifications and alerts that are generated by that UTM system, that there is guidance on how that maps to human roles, and also that there's a consideration for any training or the human factor of the operator in interpreting that type of information. Next slide.
Questions? So thank you. That's it. I think we are ahead of schedule. We have 30 minutes. I think we.
Yeah, you're about. We have time for questions.
So if there are any questions, we welcome any questions at this time, and I would welcome the team to please pitch in wherever needed. So.
And I'll just remind everyone, we microphones are in the ceiling, and so when, if you do have a question or during the discussion, just enunciate and speak a little louder than normal, so we can pick you up. Thank you. Toby?
Yes, hi, I mean, it's Robbie Sponge-Roy with Cerberus. So two questions. One is, in one of the recommendations about establishing detection techniques, could you amplify a little bit on that? I mean, is that was Kathy mentioned that in the operational side. Now, are those detection techniques dependent upon the technologies that you may have for detection? And have you thought through that a little bit? The second question that I have is, what are you thinking of in terms of the spectrum for all of this? You know, the need for FAA and FCC compliant spectrum that provides a reliable, resilient communications link across all of these elements of the ecosystem. What have you thought, or have any recommendations on that front? Thank you.
So Kathy, I'll go first and then you can jump in. So I'll answer the second question first. I used to be on FCC TAC, by the way. So we did not consider anything from that point of view, from a spectrum point of view. The recommendations were at a much higher level. What we need to, from an operational point of view, what we need to do from an aircraft or aircraft-related technology, not specific spectrum. So if you see, one of the recommendations in there was, for one of the sections was, we should test C2 technologies for range. It was not what spectrum are you, protected spectrum or not, unlicensed or not. It's just whatever the C2 technology is. Now there may be a next level, a standard that may be needed that defines what that needs to be. But this is just a recommendation at the high level. And then the other aspect of your question was around the detection technologies. I don't know the specific recommendation you're talking about, but from an operator point of view, it's just awareness of what's in the airspace, so they know what's happening and where they should fly, they shouldn't. But if there's no specific, that was not the intent of in the blue section. Now, when we kind of consolidated, roll these recommendations up, we had and there's a detailed matrix where we put together, and some of these recommendations had touch points in two or more areas. So it was not just in one. So we had some that had touch points in blue and purple, some that had purple and stuff. So they may have ended up in one, but they have touch points in others as well, if that makes sense. Kathy, you want to add something else?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So we did identify a problem statement. We put in recommendations. We identified some of the things that potentially could happen. So we did discuss on these particular recommendations what it is we are looking at. So for the one that you were specifically talking about, it's the raise awareness of mid-air collision risks at low altitudes and establish detection techniques. We did talk about the detection techniques and the fact that there were standards being developed, but of course it is determined those standards by, to some extent, what detection technique you're using, how autonomous your system is. Are you doing visual observers? And so when you got into those, the best practices, you could be doing a wide range of things, because it could be anything from visual line of sight all the way through BVLOS, detect and avoid at long range, with radar or optical or acoustic or something. So we didn't want to specify that it's something that you need to have established here in terms of the actual standards spelled out. But it's knowing that those detection techniques are there and working to establish them in your protocols based on the operations that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that. It's what's appropriate for the environment, and there's not an approved list of specific things for a reason. It's because, for example, some of the things we talked about, ADSB is more effective in an environment where ADSB is mandated, such as Mosi Vale or someplace like that. Acoustic detection techniques may be more appropriate. Optical may be more appropriate, depending on the environment that you're operating in. And combinations of these things have generally been proven to be the most effective. So how you put that particular recipe together for your operational environment and against your CONOP is what factors into the operational risk assessment. We're always tracking back to that ORA, right? So that allows UAS operators to build the safest and best systems that match their CONOPS and operating environments. And that's been a standard theme for years now.
Thanks, Kathy.
I mean, that was a fantastic presentation and a lot of hard work, obviously, done on this. And I have one little bit, and I just want to see what thinks about this now. I'll go back to start at the beginning, right? We talk about strong foundation, right? On the priority side, when we say positively, do everything that positively impacts safety, then we say speed integration, UAS and A. The word speed, right, implies that we're not going fast. And I'm kind of certain that the FAA has gone at a pace that it feels is appropriate, right, for implementation. Not that there can't be improvement or anything like that. But to me, it seems to not convey, I think, what the message is here, right? It's not that we don't want to proceed efficiently and properly. I mean, you get pulled over for speeding, right? You don't get pulled over for tempo or momentum. Right. Is there a better word to use for that? So as it's not miscommunicated, because in the safety world, you can read a million articles, a lot of articles about speed, and as a pilot, I can tell you, if you tell me to be safe, but you tell me to speed things up, it's not necessarily the same. Not that that's an apple to apple. I know what you're trying to say here. I just think it could be.
We can look at this in the final.
I don't agree. Sorry.
Those things are
An airplane flies a lot faster than a car. We don't associate the speed of an airplane against the cars on site. So I think we just need to be careful, because I don't think most of us would suggest that this process has gone quickly.
Well, no,
It certainly hasn't.
I agree. It hasn't. Right? But what I'm saying is that this seems to imply to me, right, just we want a speed integration of UAS and AM.
We just want an efficient.
But you can't do that, right, until all these other things that we just talked about.
I don't want to. I guess what I'm reacting to is that I sort of get a little bit fed up with the words speed being a proxy for not being safe. And in fact, we've got to change it nomenclature. We're going to be left in the dust. Right? I mean, the best thing to do is nothing, which is slow. Right? If you don't want to incur risk. I think what the team is saying is that we need to be efficient in how we execute. And the efficiency should be at the speed that's needed to suit the environment we're in.
And like I said, I agree with you, and I think that's what you're trying to look at. My personal.
No, I am in the noise corner here on my own, so I realize that word.
So I would add just one thought kind of along, because when I think about this, is one of those perceptions, right? It's a perception within the community that we'll continue to overcome. Because there are some folks who associate those two, but I think for us, how do you combat it? How do you combat it? Look at the concept, very concept, which I thought was real template that you guys should get this to the lens of best medicine for risk, right? It all starts there, right? So there's no shortcuts. That's what I wrote down here as I'm listening. This was comprehensive. So that's the foundation, right? That's what the O'Brien message was. There's no shortcuts. There's a proven process. It's in alignment with traditional aviation and very comprehensive. And oh, by the way, we do want to move things along because technology is moving fast.
Yeah, I want the
tempo
tempo
to your point, this perception of speed, I think as we speak to it as industry, moving industry forward, you need to understand that context. I think your point is well taken because that is a perception out there that we have to be mindful of. And often that right here is not moving fast enough, right? And so I think it's a misperception, but we have to have context for it.
And you use the word tempo, right? That suggests time. And that, in that sense, exactly.
If I may,
I'm just saying, you give people, an opportunity to be.
Let's give Kathy a chance. She has her hand up. Kathy.
Yeah. So
Go
in terms of the discussion here, a lot of the discussion was not necessarily tying the UAS and the AAM to the same time frame. Because with the small UAS, we're going to be able to implement some of these technologies safely more quickly. And if we wait for the development of standards that encompass everything, both advanced air mobility on the UAM scale, as well as the small, 4-inch racing drone, we're going to be slowed down on that front. So in that case, speed is a consideration, but it isn't a function of at the expense of safety. It was a function of let's do what we can on the smaller realms first to keep this moving as we're working on the more challenging, larger UAS components.
Plus, we're literally proving concepts, we're proving implementations, we're proving operational viability of systems in a much lower risk way when we're talking about small UAs that can then be either upscaled or expanded to support AAM with a track record behind them. And so I'll give for example, the DFW initiative, right? So we're doing strategic deconfliction, automated strategic deconfliction with 7 different operators in the same area. That's going to be useful to the UAM environment. And we're doing that in a way that's much lower risk. So trying to slow that down and wait on everyone else will literally kill the small industry. Just kill it.
So I think it was just the context. You have to understand the context in which we were moving the words. So it's just the context. Your point is well taken. I think Houston.
When you're listening to priority, that's all I'm mentioning is I would be.
Yeah, as you can tell, the team is very.
Yeah, well, I'm not suggesting we slow it down. I kind of figured I'd be on the wrong side of this particular part.
You'll end up sitting on the edge.
Right there, right. So I think you know what I'm trying to get at.
I'm just as a question during your conversations, right? So standard setting, especially technical standard setting, are deliberative processes that tend to be on the slower side, right? For all good reasons, especially when you're looking at safety. But I think about, just to use 5G as an example, that part of the FCC's considerations was, well, in the telecom side, we just switch out stuff fast, right? On the avionics side, we do not do that. I think that this maybe sort of falls a bit in between, right? Where, so we may see the pace of change going faster. This is a natural course here, and then we also have standard sense bodies that have a pace here. So I guess my question is, I think that is there enough resourcing or whatever it takes in order for standard setting to move at the appropriate pace of change for this community in terms of either the oversight of the community bodies, the ASTM and RTCA, whoever, and also the industry subject matter expertise that has to be known to the process. Is that resource?
Yeah, so that's the next level down, because as a group, there's only so much we could accomplish in 6 months. The goal was to identify these 6 recommendations. One of our recommendations would be that work should continue now to figure out, because we identify where the standards are already there. Scott touched on that, like in the third category, there's a lot of standards already out there, so we're way ahead of the power curve on that. Now in the other areas, not quite so. So now we have to identify whether it's RTCA, whether it's ASTM, whether it's Europay. There's work already going on to go and do mapping. What all is there, what doesn't exist, and identify those. So if you were to ask me a question directly, are we staffed and resources, everything being worked on? I can't tell you for sure that it is. But what the goal was to identify what those gaps are.
All right, guys, at this time, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Certainly, there'll be more questions. There's a lot of good work, generate some great comments. And so, can I get a motion to approve the policy recommendations for task group 17 report to the FAA? So, shoot second. Second. All right, thank you. All right, so we'll do that. All in favor? Aye. Right, object? All right, so again, Commit and team, thank you all for this phenomenal work. And I think the FAA is going to have some really good recommendations to work on. So thank you.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity, and thank you to the team.
Okay, so our next briefing will be from task group 16. They were tasked at the August AAC with recommendations for innovation and infrastructure investments. Kevin Cox from Verport and Michael Senate from Boeing, and their team will now present their recommendations. Again, this is a space that's moving very quickly, and so I think the timeliness of these recommendations is very useful.
Thanks, Houston, and thanks to everybody in the room and online. We're going to bifurcate our presentation. Michael has the heavy lift and I have the easy lift to begin with. So make sure you ask all the tough questions to Michael. If you go to the first slide, we wanted to make sure that everybody understands what the tasking was. We won't read it to you, but I've been in the aviation business 35 years and I've never seen a sentence that has innovation and infrastructure in the same context. So it was an exciting opportunity for us to look at things very differently amongst the industry as we look to where we are today, where we want to go, and the autonomy that goes with it. We too, like the last task force, took generously the time of the FAA officials, many in this room, to give us some guidance in terms of exactly where we wanted to go and make sure that we were not boiling the ocean, as Michael likes to talk about, but focusing on the things that are most important. And those included, obviously, we've talked about it a zillion times, and it remains at the forefront of everything, is safety, safety, safety. So everything we talk about here has that foundational impact on whether we're talking speed, whether we're talking infrastructure, digitalization, or workforce. But the other was focus in the next 5 years, because if we look at 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we will lose sight of the opportunities that sit in front of us and how we're going to try to develop this infrastructure and develop everything that goes with the transformative form of transportation that's out there. And it includes everything. We're not just talking AAM, we're not just talking, UAM, we're not just talking a particular type of aircraft or a particular business model or a particular location. It's all of the above, which by definition makes it a little complicated, but you'll see as we go through here, there's some common themes that we can't lose sight of at the end of the day, that these are aircraft. They have to land, they have to take off, they have to be serviced. And if we remember that at the end of the day, we don't need to look at these things as something unusual and different that have never been dealt with before as it relates. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the key takeaways. I'm sorry, the process, that's right. We went through a fairly robust process. We had asked for written input from the AAAC. Many members here produced some good information as well as outside. We thought it useful to go outside of the traditional to make sure that others that may want to have a voice in this process to do that. And at the end of the day, we focused really on the three subgroups of physical infrastructure, digital, and human capital. And again, as I indicated in the prior slide, we wanted to focus on traditional airports, facility upgrades, new green sites, kind of an all of the above as it relates to how we look at this stuff. And the same goes for the investment piece. It's not just what FAA's role is. It's not just what private sector or state or local. It's an all-in approach when we look at trying to develop a brand new industry in it with a commercial viability and bringing it into market as quickly and as safely as possible. We took that written and we pulled it into some online meetings. We had some good give and takes. They were individual and collectively. At the end of the day, we had the horrific task of trying to condense all of that into about 9 or 10 slides, which we've tried to do here today, but we also have submitted, as requested, a formal written narrative that helps provide a little bit more color as it relates to that. Quickly, I want to thank all the contributors. I won't go through them, but they were very helpful, very thoughtful, both in terms of their time and where they wanted to provide the input. Next slide, please. Your next slide, huh? There we go. Key takeaways. We talked about it. When you look at all of the parameters that exist of all the different types of aircraft, from drones to cargo to whatever, and you look at the various sites, whether they're connecting points that no longer have a viable commercial traffic or whether they're going right into the heart of downtown Manhattan, there is a tendency to look at this and be overwhelmed by it. At the end of the day, there are common themes, and that's what I've already kind of explained, and that is that we cannot overthink some of this stuff. We need to have safety at the top, but it's still at the end of the day an aircraft, and that aircraft is flying, putting a mission, whether it is into a traditional airport or whether it is into a new site. It still needs to have all the commonalities that go with it, which includes the landing area, the taxiing area, the taking care of the aircraft. And that was one of the common themes that we believe transcend all forms of this transportation. It should be considered. There are also some immediate needs. I mean, if we sit back and wait for autonomy, or we wait for everything that has to occur, or we wait till 2028 or 2029 to introduce the first aircraft to the first vertiports, we will, it's been described here, left behind. And I know that's not the FAA's desire. They've been moving from our perspective quite well as we attempt to try to move these through the process. But as we move through the process, we'll talk about how those best practices will be lessons learned for those that follow, whether they're at a traditional NEPA type process or whether they are at a new greenfield site that have nothing to do with traditional aviation. And then we've talked about this before in others. This is an industry that will only be successful. I don't care if it's on the infrastructure side or the commercial side or the digitization side, if we collaborate. And that's not only on the federal, but the state and the local. You know, you guys have processes, the FAA processes that we will follow. We're working with, you know, Shanetta and everybody else as we go through those processes. But this industry takes on its head when you look at the infrastructure. Airports have traditionally been built out, and you bring the people to the airport. They have the benefit of building DFW Airport and the runways, and overnight you have thousands of people around it. This whole form of transportation puts that on its head. Whether it's people or cargo, you are taking that cargo, that airport to where the people are. And it does have some implications that have to be dealt with on the local level and collaborate and ensure that you're not just dropping and getting approval to build a brand new facility just because you can have the ability to fly it. You have to have a commuter acceptance, and that's where we believe it is extremely important that we collaborate. Training, education, and partner investment. My last slide before I hand it off is the next one. Physical infrastructure findings. So one of the things that truly to unlock this, the best that this industry has to promise, whether you're flying a drone, whether you're moving cargo, or whether you're moving people in UAM, is it needs a mix. It is not going to be, in our humble opinion, just connecting airports or connecting old aviation sites. To really unlock the capabilities we have got to, as I said, put the industry on its head and bring these vertiports to where the people are, where they want to go, where the cargo is, or where it wants to go. And that will imbibe both combination of environments if we look at it, and we'll give you some recommendations at the end. At the end of the day, I've mentioned it now 2 or 3 times, whether you are building something this size, this room, for drones, or whether you have an 1 acre, 2 or 3 acre site for moving people or cargo, it still have commonalities. It still has the ability to ensure that we have the safe landing areas, that we have the direction and the regulations that ensure that we meet all the performance standards of the particular aircraft that are being marketed. And we can't forget that. We don't need to overcomplicate, in our opinion, some of the basics that work there. The other thing that's critically important when we're talking about infrastructure is this industry is not built upon going through, waiting 30 minutes, an hour, getting on a plane, taking off, waiting another 30 minutes, an hour. It's all about efficiency. And to be efficient for this commercialization, you've got to have facilities that can adapt and turn quite quickly. And that is a different rhythm than traditional airports that move in hub mentalities and where you have people sit and located. And that by itself has facility implications that we'll talk about. Multi-connectivity is also extremely important. We've talked about connecting it, you know, where you can find ingress and egress, where you can connect to bus, where you can connect to train and that sort of stuff to truly leverage what this has. Grid improvements, if we're strictly talking electrical, are going to be a challenge. You just have to read the newspaper of what the challenges are. Some of the estimates are going to be, you know, 17 times what we currently have in terms of the electrical grid for cars and buses and trains, and then put on top of that these electrical aircraft. So when you site these locations, you've got to make sure that we have all the grid infrastructure in place, or you have the ability to capture it through battery technology. Sensor-rich infrastructure and UTM supporting infrastructure, whether it's on the ground or in the air. We cannot simply go, this goes to the 5-year versus the 10, 15-year that we're looking full autonomous. You can't simply take these aircraft, expect an airport or a private investor to spend millions and millions of dollars, and then the rules of the road change 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, where we're tearing up concrete and having to rebuild its infrastructure. At the same time, we need to anticipate those needs and be prepared to look for the second generation, third generation aircraft, whether it's size, whether it's a different form of propulsion. And so those are some of the infrastructure findings we'll give you at the end of this, kind of our recommendations. Michael.
Thank you. I keep telling my colleague Kevin that I go by Mike, and I only go by Michael when I'm in trouble.
Go ahead, Michael.
And then I realize I'm in trouble all the time. But and before I do one, I do want to thank Karen Moreland and Ben Ivers, who were the teammates that helped us pull a lot of this information together and continue to to focus us on the tasks at hand. So thanks to you as well. Digital infrastructure is really challenging because we've got separate. I mean, really, you can think of it as 3 or 4 different kinds of business models, some of which are operating today, and we want to slow them down. So the UAM work that's going on today, drone delivery, things like that, that's in place. It's operating in some areas, and it uses communication and digital methods that we don't want to necessarily slow down, but then we also have to get ready for what comes next, which is going to be carrying people in and out of vertiports. It's going to be autonomous operation with cargo, and at some point autonomous operation with people as well. So we need to make sure that we're not slowing down one end of that, and we're trying to build on it to the extent possible as we find our standards. Clearly, engagement from the FAA is going to be extremely important in this, and that's really across all lines of business to make sure that they're guiding and that and partnering with industry as we figure these things out. Automation systems are going to be important at the airports and vertiports, but automation for how the system deals with the operators. So the physical infrastructure and the operation, the connection with the operators of the vehicles and with the vehicles themselves. Traffic management and how it fits into traffic management systems that we have today is extremely important. And it's again, this is a multi-domain challenge that we've got to think about. It's going to be traffic, UAS traffic. It's going to be AAM. It's going to be traditional traffic, and they've got all work together. Digitization of air traffic services is really important, and that means that data centers may have to be upgraded and modernized to handle the amount of data that we're talking about here. Digital publication of machine-readable nav aids is extremely important. Digital distribution of localized weather data in a way that doesn't exist today is really important. We anticipate we'll be operating in places that don't currently handle air traffic today. And the current weather setup doesn't provide enough information, enough local information, like winds, for example, that will have to be measured and broadcast. So figuring all that out is going to be really, really important. And procedures, new AAM traffic procedures will be important, terminal operation procedures. There are procedures that can be designed by people that design procedures today, working closely with the FAA. But the procedures that are out there for existing aircraft aren't necessarily the same procedures that we'll need in the future of operations. And then lastly, spectrum and how we protect the spectrum for all of this data that's being distributed, both from a cyber perspective, from an operational security perspective, and from how we build on spectrum infrastructure that's being used today so that we don't obsolete equipment and procedures that are being used today by the current users. So you look at any one of these and you realize that there's a significant amount of standards work that's going to have to be developed, and the challenge is going to be developing those standards on top of what's already being used so that we don't slow down the progress that's been made or slow down the users that are using the airspace today. Extremely important. If we go forward and think about the human capital aspect of this, next slide, please. Human capital is really, really important. When we look at process improvement and perhaps alignment with existing processes or how those may change, there's a lot of room for improvement, for not necessarily going faster, but being more efficient maybe in how we do this work. For example, looking at the National Environmental Policy, we are talking about introducing vehicles that are quieter than vehicles that we have today, and also zero emission vehicles. And if you can bring environmental benefits of noise reduction and emissions reduction there might be some potential for being able to streamline how you bring those vehicles into play. So that's important. Federal versus local, there's going to be federal involvement, obviously, but also local involvement. They've got to be able to integrate together and be aligned in the rules and operational procedures that are proposed. And then also we have to think about not just the aviation, but the surface as well. Kevin talked about how we're going to be bringing the aviation to people versus bringing people to aviation, and figuring out how we integrate the aviation side of that with the ground side, how we can link together information about who's coming and who's going, the amount of traffic that we will expect as a function of time over the course of operation. Those things are all going to be really, really important. Funding analysis and gap analysis, I'll talk in a minute about the potential public-private partnerships for funding. But really doing a gap analysis of what's going to be needed and trying to start to outline and align where that funding would come from is important. And workforce training in ways that we haven't thought about yet. This is also really important. You think about first responders, you think about medical response or firefighting response. How do you train people in those environments for that specific kind of work with unmanned vehicles? That's really important. Existing programs, there are a lot of existing programs that can be studied for applicability, to determine exact applicability to AAM, adapting and clarifying aircrew requirements. So we've got a certain set of requirements around the people that operate vehicles today that in a large part is medically driven and around their own human capabilities. That's going to need to be rethought as you have remote operators that don't necessarily have to have the same physical characteristics. There are people that work in our industry today that can continue to work and grow in the industry, but in different ways. And so when we think about remote operators, they don't necessarily have to be created from outside of our industry. They can come from inside our industry, but they may be differently able. So we have to think about things like that as well. And then also engaging with spectrum entities. A lot of the training is going to be training not around just the operation of the vehicles, but the operation of the data and how the data flows. And then lastly, when we think about the funding, the potential funding operations, go to the next slide, please. There's a lot that can be tied together with public-private partnerships. And one of the important ways to think about this is that this new world of AAM is going to create opportunity, and it's going to create growth in communities, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And we have a history of people not wanting airports in their environment, in their neighborhoods, let's say. But the fact is, with the reduction in noise and the reduction in emissions, people may want these things operating in their neighborhoods, and it can bring local opportunity, jobs, and other revenue opportunities. So public-private partnerships is going to be really important. Federally, obviously, tying existing programs and looking at the broad spectrum of programs that are available today, and trying to create maybe a catalog of what those programs are and how they would be available to people in our industry, because it's not that transparent today. And there's a lot that's available that people don't know about. So creating some kind of catalog of opportunities will be important for people that are trying to grow inside this industry. State and local, with respect for what can be done federally, understanding where the boundaries are, how you bring state and local partnerships in as well is also important. And again, that can be tied back to the opportunity that's created. And then lastly, educational institutions. And whether you're talking about educational institutions partnering with government, partnering with state and local, or partnering with those in the AAM industry, there's a lot of capability that can be provided. And not only at the university level, but also at the high school level, you see some of that today. So a lot of opportunity for partnerships, a lot of opportunity for creating new funding sources, or for tying to existing funding sources that we have today. A lot of information, a lot of great feedback that was provided by people on the AAC and outside of the AAC, kind of tried to coalesce it now down to just a couple of key recommendations. And Kevin wants to take first. Thank you.
Next slide, please. We've kind of already mentioned the physical aspects, the complexity and related to it, but at the end of the day, it is really an all-in approach and all of the above approach, right? If we're going to be successful from the federal side, it needs to cross and be led by the FAA, but it crosses over all sorts of other boundaries from GSA, DOD, BRAC, and EDA, and others. And I know there are intergovernmental task force already working on that, and we need to continue that effort to ensure that we are collaborating. What we can't be done, which I know is not an objective of the FAA, is get it all right here and then find out TSA or somebody else has some issues and somehow we find ourselves delayed a year or two unnecessarily. So an all-in approach is critical in terms of fiscal infrastructure piece. Align and communicate, we've had these conversations and from my perspective, they're getting much, much better. But traditionally when you're doing infrastructure at a particular area, you start local and you work your way up to the federal. In this situation, aligning the local, regional, and federal around a process as we go through these, whether they're on an airport, off an airport, or some sort of retrofit is critical and important so that the left hand and the right hand knows what's going on. We also believe there are opportunities to streamline. NEPA is a perfect example. When you're talking about an aircraft that is extremely quiet, it has no emissions, and is on a airport that will have very limited impact, if any, whatsoever. There are ways we would encourage the FAA to look at to try to streamline that process. We recognize maybe the first or second one out of the box may not get that streamlined, but over time we believe it will significantly help the advancement if we can streamline that process. The other we've talked a little bit about, which is promoting P3 opportunities. At the end of the day, no local community is going to want to spend all of their money. No state is going to want to spend all of their money. And the federal government obviously has a bunch of challenges. So the private sector can step in and provide some seed and technology and risk averse approach to try to begin developing these in a very thoughtful manner. And we believe that that's extremely important. We've talked about it. The group in front of us already has standards laid out in terms of that, but there will be additional standards that we're going to have to anticipate when we're talking about moving people. And those advisory circulars need to be thought through, which we know you guys are beginning to think through, but it's critical that we continue to advance that process. And then at the end of the day, the integration that we're talking about, communicating across government lines, is absolutely critical. So if I had to summarize the physical infrastructure, it seems very complex. It seems very different environments, but at the end of the day, it's what you guys do for a living, which is ensure that we're safe, ensure that these aircraft can operate as they're prepared to be operated, and then empower those that can build and construct and operate them in a safe manner to do so. So with that, I'll turn the last page of recommendations over to Mike.
Thank you. Next slide, please. To summarize really on digital infrastructure, it's going to be focusing on taking what we have already today, not slowing things down that are in operation today, but building on it. Doing a gap analysis to understand where there's holes in the data that's provided, taking into account the future use cases and the ConOps for the environment, and then developing the procedures that are going to be required to operate in the environment. From the human capital perspective, it's really looking at the applicability of existing programs and how they can contribute to what we have today, utilizing the existing workforce perhaps in different ways and also growing the workforce, and then tying up with existing think tanks and educational organizations to try to wrap their heads around this. So again, it's really just building on what we have, filling in the gaps safely as we take into account new business models, and then moving forward. A lot of input from a lot of people, and we're happy to take questions.
Mike is happy to take questions.
Whoa.
Yeah, I just asked. Go ahead to look at Chair, can I ask? Thanks. All right. Okay. So first of all, I want to say my questions, I'm going to couch just by saying I agree with most everything that's in this report. I've lived I was very lucky. Our BB game has been blessed because we've had our own infrastructure, assets, data centers, comms, spectrum, everything. We've been very lucky for almost a decade that we've had that. So I agree with what you're calling on. But I have two questions. Again, these aren't to take away from the quality of the report by any means. First thing is simple. I see that there are some public-private partnership mentions, there's some other things, but was there some hesitance to come out and say, look, somehow, some way, the industry needs to influence Congress to appropriate the FAA much more in the form of financial resources to bring this new venture to bear? How come we didn't say that specifically, that this isn't quasi partnership, but the FAA needs more money to bring these things forward? Was there a reason that we were hesitant to say that?
No, I mean, I think it was implicit and maybe not as explicit as it should be. There's no question that we believe appropriations and funding on the Hill will be extremely critical to advance this. But we also don't want to mislead or lead anybody to believe that the federal government is going to fund all of this and it's all going to be taken care of. Sure. So it was a combination of a mix. So to the extent, unless there's any confusion, we are 110% supportive of the federal government advancing AAM. I personally was on the Hill yesterday doing just that, explaining that there needs to be these opportunities for them to push, fund these men and women so they can continue to do their jobs with the associated manpower. So we're all in. The flip side of it is it's not going to be solved purely by federal funding, and that's where we fundamentally believe it's an all-in kind of approach.
And can I just add to that on the funding point? I had the same note about that. Funding is a really critical piece of this for everyone. So on the grant side, we obviously had a generational investment by Congress in DOT, $660 billion. For some reason, FAA only got 25 million. Bad on us next time around. We'll be in there fighting for it. But even under the discretionary grant programs, we're able to fund only 10% of the applications because the need is so desperate across this country, and that's transportation generally. So grant opportunities are going to be few and far between, and that's just the reality of where we are. On the FAA funding, hopefully all of you have looked at or will look at the President's FY25 budget, which tries to begin to address the diminishing impact of our facilities and equipment. So our facilities and equipment, which is, for those of you in the industry, think of it as your capital budget, we really don't have that. We know what our needs are, but we don't have a capital 5-year, 10-year funding that we can use. The President's budget proposes $8 billion in mandatory funding from the trust fund to begin to dig us out of that hole. That's, as I said, the first step, but that's the kind of concept that all of us, regardless of AAM or whatever it is as we are building for the NASA of the future, we've got to solve these long-term funding issues, and we've got to do it in a way that everybody's going to be able to stand up and salute, which is really hard to do because everyone has their own individual interests that they're pursuing. But if we are really collectively looking at building the NASA of the future and new entrants and new opportunities, we need to look at that. And just to give you a sense of how dire the situation is with our facilities and equipment budget, we've had a loss of purchasing power of about $1 billion over the last decade, and roughly 92% of our facilities and equipment budget goes to sustainment, not modernization. We have 8% we need to modernize. That is not sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable. But I just want to. I think we all know this, but we have to root those in reality into the challenge, funding challenge that's in front of us. Absolutely.
And I think.
Should anybody want to add to that?
Well, I want to let you answer. I had another part of that funding question.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that because you described really well, I think, the challenge in the modernization and in the upkeep of existing facilities. I think one of the things we recognize is that there is going to be need for new facilities that don't exist today in locations where they don't exist today. And that's, I think, where a lot of the public-private partnership comes in. If you're creating opportunities in smaller communities, creating opportunities where there isn't infrastructure today, that might be where you have the applicability of private funding or public-private partnerships.
So, right where I wanted to go in regards to public-private partnerships, because when you think about that model, it's finance, own, operate, right? So are you all thinking that this is location by location or in a system of things? So for a company to come in or 3 or 4 companies to come in and say this is going to be a profitable model, how did you all see that actually being profitable?
So I can speak for my company and then try to answer it for the industry. There are so many different business models out there from an infrastructure perspective, focused on so many different opportunities. Some of them in the heart of downtown Manhattan, some of them connecting sites with existing infrastructure and trying to resurrect and infuse new into it. I think all of those are viable. I think the benefit of a P3 partnership or private investment is you unleash the communities to go out and find those opportunities and plant these. So for our company, we believe that you have to build networks, and those networks then have to tie together. But we are very supportive of other people building networks, because the more charging stations you put on the ground, the more dots that you put on the ground, the more network that you will develop. We can't do it alone. No one company, no government can do it alone. It's going to have to be, like I said, an all-in approach. So from a commercial perspective, our company personally is focused on highly congested areas, which are difficult to get people from point A to point B, where there's a willingness to pay and a need for that infrastructure, where here compare and contrast putting a train system in or putting highways in can be very, very expensive and very time consuming. We can go build these on an acre to 3 acres and connect 4 dots with relatively ease, assuming that we are working collaboratively with the community. The last thing we want to do is dump these in, go seek approval, and then have a community unhappy. We want them to want this kind of activity. So there are various P3 opportunities. We're supportive of all of them, because at the end of the day, we believe private sector can help move the entire industry. And at the end of the day, some of them can be more commercially viable than others. I mean, we had conversations on the Hill today, or yesterday as well. Can you connect community X that has no service to community Y? Or how can I get from my community and under the Essential Air Service program and utilize a different type of aircraft? So there are tons of opportunities out there. Who knows what's the most commercially viable? But there's a lot of interest from a lot of carriers and a lot of companies that want to do that. As long as we are collaborating with the FAA and doing it thoughtfully, then I think you unleash the power of private money.
I think we have a question or a comment from Kenji.
Yes, I do have a comment. First off, I wanted to say thank you for your collaborative approach in this report. It was very good, and I was appreciative that ATA Aviation was also included, because one of the most important things that we have to do is get alignment not only among industry, but also the federal side as well as the state side. And ATA Aviation represented the multi-state collaborative. So for those folks who haven't heard about what's going on with the multi-state collaborative, we are a group of states, a lot of DOT as well as aviation agencies that are going to be putting out consensus papers about the scope of AAM and role of states, lessons learned from the states, basic principles of the state approach to AAM, policy harmonization, physical and digital infrastructure, extending, leveraging current aviation infrastructure, and approaches to sustainable system funding. So from our perspective, one of the most important things, as was stated before, is we don't want to be going to our state legislators and asking for a bunch of infrastructure investments and then suddenly having the standards changed on that. So just having our involvement in this process has been fantastic. And this group, as well as the interagency working group, as well as the multi-state collaborative, have really been talking. So there's a lot of discussions to make sure that we aren't moving in divergent directions. And the paper and the presentation show all this alignment, which is a very good thing. And Shanetta, I know you're there. We had this conversation as well at the NASEO conference, but this is the type of alignment we absolutely need to move this industry forward. And it's great to see this paper, or actually this report, come out the way it is, because I think this report is really one of the foundational pieces to moving advanced air mobility forward. So congratulations, great job, and thank you so much.
Hey, Michael and Kevin, sorry. Mike.
Scare me there, Dave.
I know. After 20 years, I've got to see what it felt like with Michael. Hey, this is fantastic. Just to back up what Kenji said, I do think there's an opportunity that we don't think about that is applicable here. And Kevin, your board would be thrilled with the answer you just gave about where we're going. There's an opportunity to use this space to actually develop the traditional space. So if you introduce technologies here, it almost becomes like a means of your means and your basis of compliance. It almost becomes the evidence for why you, or how and what you can use to raise the bar in the traditional space that is getting it's slow by virtue of the fact that technology on the aircraft or technology at the airports aren't keeping up with the cycling demands, and humans can't keep up with it, whereas technology can. And I think I love what you've got here. I would advocate for just one bullet to say, use this space as the proof point, because if it's safe enough to actually use, it's proof point to then go and influence the traditional space to continue raising more boats.
That's a fantastic.
So we'll take one more question. Monica, you want to jump in, and then we'll.
Yes, hi. Thank you. And I want to underscore Kenji's comments and thank this work group for these great recommendations. I'd just like to add to that as well. And I think that when we're thinking about funding and thinking about the work that needs to happen, it's important to remember that at the state, regional, local, tribal level, there's a lot of planning that needs to happen, and there's a need for funding for that as well. I want to, in particular, underscore the metropolitan planning organizations who under DOT are tasked with guidance and policy around transportation in their regions, and the importance of their role in planning this, as well as state and local DOTs. Yesterday, the American Planning Association released the new guidebook, Planning for Advanced Air Mobility, that was co-written by myself and Adam Cohen and Susan Shaheen, CAMI expert contributors. This is a 100-page guidebook on for planners on how to plan for advanced air mobility. So I just want to make sure that we remember that all of these state and local jurisdictions need funding to plan for this as well, and they need enough runway to get there to coincide with when industry is ready to begin operations. Again, thank you to this team for doing a great report. And I look forward to continued collaboration, as Kenji mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you. So again, Kevin, Mike, thank you all, and all the task group for just another fantastic good job of collaboration and bringing forth some meaningful recommendation with a space that's accelerated. And these things are definitely going to be needed. I know you and the team will take these on and embrace these recommendations as well. I did want to make a comment as you guys talked about education. I was taken back to Task Group 12 and Dr. Shu and the work that you guys did in terms of the education piece that not only talked about you, but also talked about the community. So you kind of see these building block pieces connecting. All the work that we're doing collaboratively are really connecting to those things. So well done. If I could get a motion to accept the AAA recommendations from Task Group 16 to report to the FAA. So moved. Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, any objections to approving the motion moving forward? We'll move forward. So with that in mind, Gary, we had the 15-minute break, I'm gonna cut it back to 10 minutes. That's right. So I show 2:45, so why don't we count on reconvening at 2:55? Thank you.
Our next set of briefings are some information updates and first up is Joe Mora from Flight Standards, and Joe will update us on the upcoming end of remote identification discretionary enforcement. And the second briefing was one that was first presented back in April of 23 at the AAAC meeting on Innovate 28. And we have Praveen Raju from the Next Gen office, and he'll be handling the assignment update on where Innovate 28 is at the moment. So, Joe?
Gary, I don't know, yep, got the slides pulled up. Thank you for having me here. Lots of familiar faces. I'm Joe Mora. I happen to be right now, I've been with the UAS Integration Office for many years. This past year, though, we started a new division in Flight Standards. I get to be the inaugural division manager over there. It's the Emerging Technologies Division. And we've stayed focused on UAS, on drones for right now. And really what that's kind of contemplating is the things that are under Part 107, things that we're contemplating under the new rule right now, and things that are being done through exemption, waiver, deviation, all that type of stuff right now. So with that, after a break, and you've been talking about some really heavy stuff here, I'm going to bring it back down to the smaller things, remote ID, and the timing was good because come this Saturday is the end of the enforcement discretion that we put out for them. So this is just the highlight of the slides that I'm going to be covering here. So we'll start with the end of enforcement discretion, what that means. And then we're going to culminate up to a call to action asking the ACT members to help get compliance with this and ensure compliance as best we can. All right, we go to the next slide, please. So end of remote ID enforcement discretion. So what this was essentially a 6-month extension to allow time for the operational component of this rule to go into effect. The date was September 16th, and that discretion, like I said, ends this Saturday, March 16th. Some of you are seeing notifications on social media, through email, through other things like that, that it's coming to an end. Why did we do that? So back in September, there's 2 compliance dates with remote identification. So to go back to the basics, remote identification, if you read the preamble of the rule, is essentially a digital license plate. So the same way that I can go out and anything transmitting ADS-B, airlines right now, anybody who's participating in that, I can essentially point an app at the sky and I can tell you which airline is flying over. One of the issues we had in rulemaking a few years back too was discussing with our security partners. Well, once you get the complex beyond visual line of sight operations, or you get to the next phase of integration, how do I know how to locate the person if I need to get to them to tell them to put that down or to do something else, or if they're not compliant? So essentially, this is the foundation of the NASA of the future as far as identifying things in the sky. So same way you have a license plate on a car, and that's just kind of ubiquitous, we do that. This was what remote ID was setting up to do. In September, there's 3 ways to comply. One way is standard broadcast remote ID, which is built into the drone. You're compliant if it's built into the drone. The second is a broadcast module that you can attach to your drone. And the third is operating in a FRIA, or FAA recognized identification. So 6 months ago, FRIAs, number one, we had a lot of applications for FRIAs. I've got some slides on that. And there was some trouble with applying for them. We weren't getting the throughput that we wanted at that point in time. The availability of broadcast modules we were hearing was a little bit tough at that time too. And it just all made sense because this is a compliance philosophy, compliance program. We want to engage this whole community. We want to see compliance. So that's why we did extend it. You can go to the next slide, please. So what do? We started tracking compliance over the last 6 months too, because the rule went into effect, but we were taking discretion and not enforcing non-compliance. So it's hard to specifically say 100% compliance because it's the same as saying how many registered cars are there and how many of those registered cars happen to just be sitting in driveways and not operating. How many drones plan to operate in FRIAs and they're not going to go update the registration to be unique serial number for a broadcast remote ID or a module. So we've been looking at the trend. So of the total UAS registered in the system, 800,000+, we are roughly at, what we're calculating, about 31% compliance. So when you break that down, that's looking at the two options there, the standard and the remote ID with modules. That adds up to about 90,000 that we're seeing just in the registration database, people going in and updating. Recreational flyers, they can have multiple aircraft. So there could be, we know of modelers that have hundreds. And you can switch broadcast modules between those. So we've actually been looking at the compliance rate in there, which is lower, but they have the whole aspect of FAA recognized identification areas too. So we've done some discussions with our largest community-based organizations, and one, for example, has set up their 190,000 members. Roughly 100,000 of them plan to just operate in FRIAs, and they don't plan to. So we've calculated that into our numbers. One additional factor, and we can go to the next slide so I can explain the FRIA factor a little bit more. Is when we went back to September and we looked at it, there was a high demand for FRIAs, but FRIAs were also getting denied. So why were FRIAs getting denied on our side? One was you're asking for people that don't normally do this to put in latitude, longitude, draw shapes. And so things were just getting kicked out because there's miscommunication, or the shapes that we were getting were ending up in different countries or things like that. So there was a failure rate that we had to help educate and work with the applicants a little bit more. So that was one thing. But the second thing is that there was not a option for, if for whatever reason we were looking at a FRIA and it was in very close proximity to an airport, or it was part of a college campus in a stadium where you otherwise wouldn't be operating drones, things like that, where you wouldn't put up a charted FRIA, we didn't have an option for that. So what we started doing was letters of authorization. So you could go through that process too. If your club had been operating there for 20, 25 years safely, and like I said, this is more of a identification rule than it is straight safety, because you could still operate there. You just have a broadcast module, or you have standard remote ID. So we did say we can give authorizations to those existing community-based organizations or educational organizations to continue operating so that they're not grounded, essentially. So since that time, we've now approved over 2,000 FRIAs, and that's on the mapping tool. You can see it on the FAA website that's open to the public. We've done a whole bunch of outreach with communications, both social media, with the main affected users. We're here today talking to all of you. And then I'm here to reiterate, for those that don't live in our flight standards compliance program every day, the question that we get is, all right, come Saturday, are we going to be standing, hiding behind buildings, handing out tickets? And the answer is no. The answer is compliance program. And I've run flight schools and I've grown up in this. To me, it's a very good program that if somebody has a compliant attitude, is working towards compliance, we don't have to use punitive action to get them into compliance. We can do oral counsel. We can do a warning. We can do, hey, I see that you were operating and I don't see your registration is updated with a serial number. We can do things. We can take down their name. We can put them in our system. We can give them a warning. If they're out there doing it again another time, or if they're doing it, repeatedly, then yes, we can always step up. Or if something's egregious, we can definitely take enforcement action. We are going to try to seek compliance at the lowest possible level, because once again, the hope is 10 years from now, this is kind of the foundation to things in the sky ultimately are registered. They're operated by people that know how to operate them. They have some sort of identification on them that you can get back to the registered owner. And this isn't a flip the light switch and done type rule. And it's also leaning into our whole philosophy of performance-based rules and trying to leverage industry-based consensus standards at a lower possible level. This is a refresh of 1 second for the signal that's broadcast out. So it's not the same as separating traffic in Class A airspace. It's a much lower barrier to entry. Go to the next slide, please. So this is just some more numbers. When you look at recreational flyers, we have over 600,000 people that have taken the TRUST, which is the Recreational User Safety Test. I forgot who was in the room here at the time, but we put the T in front of it because Russ didn't sound good. The UAS Collegiate Training Initiative, which is a great program. We've got over 136 schools signed up with the UAS Integration Office, and 41 of them are minority serving institutions. They've been a big part of this, and we've really partnered with them to get collaboratively how we can get this fully on board here. We have UAS Support Center. So once again, if you have anybody that has questions about this or they need support, U.S. Integration Office has a great support center, 844-FLY-MY-UA or UAShelp@FAA.gov, and people get back to you within less than a day. It's great. Drone Safety Day and the Drone Symposium are other places that we're going to be repeatedly talking about this. So if we go to the next one, I think that might be, we're okay. This is our last one. So we're all in this together. Once again, safety, definitely, though not directly impacting safety out there right now. We know there's lots of good safe operators out there. This is a part of the whole safety equation. We are going to be in this together. Sharing some of this data is going to help too. So wherever the ACT members can help, we know the advanced operators are already compliant right now. We know that you're doing it, but where you can reach out to others, that'd be great. There's always voluntary reporting, ASRP or ASRS, the NASA reporting that we can use for this, and that's confidential. And we encourage compliance here. Next one, I think there's questions. Okay. Was there another one?
Yeah, that was a call to action. Call to action.
I think I did. Can you go back one? So it wasn't I see Vic already put his hand up though, so I might have, I think I did my call to action. Oh no, I need the call to action slide. All right. We need your help, industry. You please share information, encourage compliance. Together, our message will be amplified. ACT plays a pivotal role. And any of the outside of the box thinking is much appreciated.
Good. We see your hand up, but please feel free.
Yeah, I've in reading through this and how we can help, this seems to be a recurring theme, but I think what we need to do is we've got this ready-made set of folks called the FAA Safety Team Drone Pros, and if we can get some educational literature, some methodology behind helping us get the word out, we're here, we're ready to work, whether we're working in a school or whether we're working on a compliance issue with someone. You've got that already built in, plus you've got the CBOs. Is the FAA working with some of the CBOs and saying, hey, look, here's some literature. Can you pass this along to your membership? Because that would probably be, definitely on the recreational side when it comes to CBOs would definitely be a help. That and the drone pros. I think you've got two ready-made systems in place, but we don't have the processes and the literature and the educational backing to get this word out. How can we help with that?
No, Vic, and I really appreciate it because I know you've got a lot of influence in this realm too, and especially with the drone pros. We'll work with the UAS integration office, and we'll see if we can simplify some of the message here to give you a better tool to do this. But I've been a big proponent of we don't need to overcomplicate this rule. This is essentially a fairly easy to say. The future of aviation is things being identified in the sky, and that actually just leads to accountability, and it leads to trust, and it leads to other things. So the thing I would ask is we can take the IOU to try to simplify some of the message, but the more you can just say this is kind of the thing. It's a rule, so we're not here to debate the rule. It's the more people do this, the more drones and UAS operations become the norm and not a standout type thing. I mean, I look back on the way that a lot of you have gotten approvals over the years here, and it's hard to watch a movie these days without having drone shots in it. It's hard to think a lot of the infrastructure, railroad, and other type of industries not using drones for inspection, bridge inspection. So that's kind of where we want to get to the next step here. That this is the evolution.
Thanks, Vic. Kenji?
Yeah. All right, Joe, thanks for that presentation. Good to see you. I got a couple things for you. So first things first, make sure to reach out to the NASAO, the National Association of State Aviation Officials, as an outlet, because I know there's probably some backlog of state agencies that might need to catch up, and it might be a good reminder from us to let them know, hey, you need to comply. The other thing I want to mention is I'm actually not at all surprised at the numbers. This falls directly in line with what I thought, and I had a conversation with Bruce DeClean and said, hey, look, one of the things that we got to wait for is the cycling out of older drones, right? Because there's a shelf life, and there's ones that are non-compliant, but eventually as people replace their fleets, that'll sort of increase compliance as well. So along those same lines, do you have data in terms of how this compares to the adoption of ADS-B? Because I'm wondering if it's going to be a similar arc, or it's going to be similar in adoption. Because I know at first ADS-B adoption was abysmal, and then there was a bunch of incentives put out by the FAA, and I'm just wondering if we're in a similar situation with remote ID.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned that. Well, number one, you're absolutely right about the life cycle of drones, and that's discussed in the whole preamble of the rule too. We use an cost estimate for it, so that's why there's remote broadcast ID modules that are an option. But the second part of that, we've talked a lot internally about ADS-B, and unfortunately, when we did this rule, the rule has a lower barrier to entry as far as cost and what the manufacturers need to do and the time that it took. You don't get at least with ADS-B, you get weather, you get other traffic coming in. So there was some value proposal, at least on the table, but that value proposal came at the cost at the time of about $4,000. Where the cost of this we talked about, would be, even for a broadcast module, is adding somewhere in the neighborhood of $50. It's turned out to be higher than that. So I don't know if we can track adoption of this directly to ADS-B adoption. I personally believe that we're always going to be at numbers that are a little bit less. That's why we're trying to figure out what is a good target to shoot for, because you're still going to have a large segment of people that, especially recreational, that never want to just operate in areas that are recognized by the FAA, and that is a way to comply with remote ID. So I will take that and then the SAO comment so that we can hopefully go on and my boss, Chris.
Hi, Chris Owen, Flight Standard. Just a quick comment on ADS-B adoption. I'm not sure it's a great comparison. Certainly in the end of 2019, the mandate was January 1st, 2020. By the time we got to the mandate, there was a very high level of adoption. So, even in the GA community, I think it was a very high level. And there were no enforcement discretion delays or anything like that. So it's interesting. And Joe makes a great point about some of the incentives and why ESP was a little bit different. But yeah, the adoption rate's actually pretty good. Now, certainly they went way up at the end. You know, it was not a straight line adoption, but it was done really, really well.
I know there's a couple other, thank you, Chris. I will also say is that, you know, someone still flies in the NAS. The change of teaching somebody to fly 10 years ago versus today and having ADSB, it's just a different realm being out there. There's, you know, having that kind of awareness is amazing. So, you know, things in the sky being identified is ultimately a good safety issue.
Okay, so we'll take 2 more questions, Christian and Jazz.
Yeah, I wanted to add on what you were saying there. We supply ADSB avionics and we supply broadcast modules. The sentiment at this time back in the ADSB mandate days is the same. You're making people spend money and they don't want to, right? And they hate it, right? ADSB had a carrot, no stick, and a stick, right? And Remote ID just has a stick. And so people, free is not cheap enough, right? If I could give it away, people still wouldn't take it. And, you know, they just don't want it. They don't want to be tracked. They don't want to be enforced. And so I think you're going to get to that point where you're going to have to start enforcing, because I think people will test you until they're, you know, they have to be forced to do so. But the flip side of that is 4 years after the ADSB mandate, people are singing praises of it, right? They're not going to be singing praises of remote ID in 4 years.
Would be nice to have locked eyes on what things, because a rule that is not observed and not policed is not a rule. So it'd be nice to know what that will. I agree with you. I feel it's the right approach, absolutely, right now, but it'd be nice to know. I think just for everyone, where it's going in terms of enforcement. Is it real or not?
I mean, the carrot is we get to operate beyond the line of sight, and that's the tool that gets us all there. But the carrot to the individual who doesn't need to fly beyond the line of sight doesn't do that.
And don't let me confuse that though too, with compliance program does mean that enforcement is in our toolbox.
Yeah.
But that's also multiplied through local law enforcement too, because we just don't have the numbers out there to take off of higher risk surveillance activities to put a focus on this. But if we are getting things that are essentially egregious, if we are getting the people that are, you know, this is where we, careless and reckless. Careless is I didn't know better. Reckless is I knew better and I still did it. And intentional is like the next step above. And many of you know that, you know, we're not afraid to pull that out if we need to. So.
Jeff Manga, Airspace. We have real data on the adoption of remote ID already, because we've got dual sensors. We see, for example, DJI, we see the DJI transmitting, and then we also see when it goes into remote ID mode. We're seeing actually excellent compliance. We're seeing anywhere of over 60% of the DJI drones that are flying actual matching signal and remote ID together, because they're transmitting in the same hardware. So both New York and San Francisco, we're seeing that compliance now. And it's specifically because DJI updated many months ago with the September deadline in motion. A lot of other manufacturers are also starting to do the same thing. So I think compliance, I would say the bulk, rough estimate, no on this week, about 70%, I believe, of the drones that are out there are going to duplicate SSIDs and shoot out the software, just from the liability aspect of it, and we found it with the FAA. So I think that will be fine. I think it'll be the specialty drones, and the specialty drones are all flown by pro pilots. They want remote IDs. I'll talk about this a little later too as well. They're using remote ID to audit their missions. If they're doing a control tower, they're turning on remote ID on their phone and they're watching the mission and they're sending the customer a copy of that. So there's some really neat uses. So we talked about carrot on that is it's being used as kind of a witness. So the compliance is pretty good so far.
That's excellent feedback. Both you and Christian, thank you.
Well, listen, Joe, thanks so much. We'll be around as well, so I think we can up some other questions. I don't know if anyone's sure, but we got still a lot to go and a lot of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Houston. I'll introduce my colleague here from AG, Praveen Raju. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know if the slides are on today. Just a quick introduction. Praveen Raju out of the Office of Next Gen. I serve as the Deputy Program Manager for the Innovate 28 work. So going from small drones to a little bit bigger vehicles here and a little bit different of an airspace. I wanted to give you a quick update from the last time. I think this was briefed here in this venue on a lot of work that's been done and some of our integration, near-term integration efforts for AAM or Advanced Air Mobility. Next slide, please. Quick overview here. Some of the major updates since the April 2023 meeting here. There's been an update to the SFAR, especially around our load, right? Looking at the vertiport standards and a lot of work that's being done within vertiport standardization, wake recategorization, and separation recommendations on some of these newer vehicles. And that's a good segue just to remind everybody, Innovate 28 is a cross-line of business, whole of agency approach to integrating these things. So we have a lot of what we call our I-team leads that are representatives from each part of the agency. I see a few of them in the room here today. So I'll lean on them for some of the specifics as it relates to airports or flight standards, but give the folks here a quick update on the various activities. We've also started to look at what the airspace integration assessments look like and impacts to some of the initial airports that are looking to integrate these types of operations into their environment, what it looks like for air traffic, what it looks like for routes, what are the impacts on some of the ground infrastructure. So we're considering a fully integrated approach and looking at doing some modeling and simulation activities within a R&D environment. And then that leads to a lot of the testing and evaluation that is starting to occur with Air Force and AFWERX specifically. There was a memorandum of agreement signed between our agency and the DoD to leverage what we can in those environments. We know some of those vehicles are initially non-conforming test vehicles, but there's a lot we can gain out of the testing that's being done there. And then some of the next steps we envision. Next slide, please. So this is a snippet of what we have in the near-term AAM integration plan. Sort of the main focus of I-28 and RE-28 AAM implementation plan is to document a lot of the activities that are needed from the various stakeholders for us to safely integrate these type of operations into the NAS. It is various levels of maturity. Some have already started, some will start sometime in the near future, and it's very dependent on each applicant. But this is not just an all-encompassing list of what FAA needs to do, but this is a community stakeholder as us all that we need to accomplish together, whether it be through airports, state, local, tribal, the local communities, right? So this is sort of that high-level picture of the various aspects that go into near-term implementation. As we move into some of the details, we do understand this is going to be an evolution of activities. We're going to learn a lot of things in near-term implementation. So the initial AAM integration plan is a great start, but it is a living document. When we anticipate it's a living document. So as we learn more, as we mature over the next few years, we'll continuously update that document or create something that's supplementary to that near-term integration plan. A quick highlight that was very recent that we had is, although there's a lot of effort that we're looking to establish, there's already a lot of work that's being done. So there's been a lot of questions around certification and individual applicants going into near-term entry into service conversations. There's been a lot of work done around Part 145, the repair and maintenance station, from various applicants. I won't get into the details, but of who or when or why, but there have been several applicants that are in the process or already have accomplished a piece of this 145 process and gotten certificated for general aviation vehicles, or looking at leveraging to establish routes and other activities. And their AAM aircraft can be added on as we move into the future and as those get type certified. We've also had a major milestone from the agency's perspective on setting forth airworthiness criteria for some of these entry into service proponents. I think if we Google, you can see who these folks are. They're making it very well known, but that's a major milestone for us as an agency. And one is very publicly out there, and many are not far behind. So they have a way of meeting a method of compliance in the future for these types of aircraft. Moving into the next slide, this is a very high-level slide of where we're starting to see activity arise in specific locations, where there's a lot of interest from the local community perspective, as well as the various proponents to do these operations to airlines. So these are some of the concentrations that we're seeing right now. It is not an all-encompassing list. We think this will evolve, but places like South Florida, Homa, North Texas, New York, right? And each of these environments have their own challenges and own impacts that we're going to have to assess. And what we want to do is make sure these vehicles and these operations are integrated safely with limited impact to current NASA operations as we move forward in this near term. Next slide, please. Here's a few significant activities that we've completed up to date and a few that we're looking at executing towards going forward. October of 23, the MOU with the AFWorks was signed, and there was a ceremony that we conducted for that signature process. We've also started to consider what autonomy means in this world, right? We know that there are several proponents that are looking at flying pilot on board as a near-term entry into service conversation, but we also know there are several proponents that are looking to have autonomy be incorporated as they come to market. So we're looking at kicking off an autonomy working group and an autonomy framework in the very near future. Looking into considering that working group, we've also conducted a webinar, and webinars are a great tool for us. We're partnering with AUVSI to have a sort of multi-layered approach to socialize a lot of our near-term efforts instead of having to wait every X amount of time before we give updates on the various aspects of near-term implementation. And then a big piece too is wake separation and wake separation recommendations for these newer type of vehicles. There was a webinar we conducted in February timeframe, but we've also started to come out with some of the recommendations, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in the next slide. And then we've also been diligently working with the Department of Transportation on the interagency working group. There's about 5 subgroups that we've taken part of. Groups range somewhere from Air Traffic Federation to infrastructure development to community engagement. We're very actively engaged in that, and that working group looks to output a national strategy here in the near future as well. So a lot of details to come out of that engagement. Sort of some of the upcoming areas that we'd like to highlight for everybody in the room here and beyond is a community engagement webinar through AUVSI as our conduit to get that information to the broader community. The drone and AAM symposium that Joe had mentioned earlier, not just for drones, we're looking to integrate the AAM and larger vehicles into the conversation, make it be sort of a seamless discussion between these disparate type of operations, right? But we do understand that NAS is a holistic view. So we're looking at having that engagement as we move forward. That'll be in the late July, early August timeframe. And then we're targeting the fall of 2024 for the powerless SFAR. You know, I get nervous when I commit to dates here as a program manager, but you know, we're working pretty hard at meeting some of these deadlines. And then going into the interagency strategy report, which is anticipated sort of towards the later time in 2024. And then there's a big sort of update we're looking for to make in the interim vertiport guidance towards the end of the 2024 timeframe, and maybe a little bit more on in terms of an engineer brief update towards the 2025. Next slide, please. So a little bit more details of the various aspects we're working on. A few more details of the few different activities we have a lot of energy behind currently. The autonomy working group, a few of the highlights here is we're looking to facilitate what this framework looks like for the longer mature term as autonomy becomes an overarching strategy we're going to have to consider. We know as the NAS sits today, there's some levels of autonomy that we use and automation that we use, but it's not the same way that we're looking at autonomy in the future. So we're going to look at doing a gap analysis, understand the current environment, what the future environment is, and then put together a framework and then go out to the external community to start doing engagement and gathering feedback. With that feedback, we'll have a framework that we're hoping to socialize towards the end of the year, of the calendar year. Going into weight categorization, in NextGen, we have a weight RECAT R&D team that's been doing a lot of work from the R&D perspective with these primarily non-conforming vehicles and taking the test and demonstration activities and leveraging that data to do some initial weight turbulence separation recommendations. There's a few vehicles here that are highlighted. Folks like Joby, the J54, the Archer Midnight is under consideration. We're doing a lot of testing with them, and these proponents have been very open and inviting now as we put this portfolio and structured approach of I-28 in executing near-term AM implementation. And then, as we do understand, these are initial recommendations, right? As this industry evolves and matures, we're going to have conforming vehicles, sort of the operational perspectives from the components that are made more available to us. And so we're going to have to take those into consideration and update those recommendations for newer weight recategorization. And then moving into vertiports, I mentioned a few things already. With these proponents, we're doing some testing with them. And for details, I'll put it to Shanetta and Carrie's teams to help walk through the details of it. But there's been a lot of testing done with these proponents and with the Air Force as well to get to a point of attaining information to update the engineering brief 105. There's been a lot of requests for when's more detailed engineering brief going to come out, right? And so we're actively working pretty diligently to get an update for engineering brief 105 towards the end of the 2024 timeframe. And then we're hoping to have a performance-based vertiport design AC or advisory circular towards the end of 25. I feel like I've been talking for a while. All right, I'm going to get through this. Next slide, please. And then these are some of the airspace integration assessments that simulation testing we're starting to explore here. The majority of these operators are targeting a lot of use cases at specific airports and specific airspace environments where sort of business and market needs are starting to arise. So we're starting to look at what that looks like, and we've seen there are some special accommodations that they've asked for as they're flying in and out of these environments. And as vehicles that are certified will emerge in the future, what type of impacts that has in that environment. And then we're starting to develop strategies to understand what this performance is and what various aircraft's performance look like and what those impacts are on the current levels of air traffic in those environments. And then there's complementary sort of integration efforts for us to get to yes safe, right? We're here to be supported, we're here to engage together. And we want to get to yes safely, right? And this is going to be an ecosystem approach. It's not just the vehicle that matters, right? It's not just certification. As we highlighted earlier, it's going to take a lot of things from airports. It's going to take engagement from local communities. It's going to take engagement from us, from the air traffic perspective, from the OEM, the proponent perspective. So it's going to be an ecosystem approach. So we're starting to work with airports and airport authorities, with our controllers, to identify sort of the benefits and the safety that these use cases are going to provide and are going to require. And then doing a lot of operational flight testing here in the near future and getting into the modeling and sim environment. And that leads me to close to my last time, in that we've established this modeling and simulation approach for impact assessment. It's really, we're leveraging a lot of our capabilities out of the William Hughes Technical Center in Atlantic City to bring these things into the fold, having engagement with these proponents with early data from whether it be non-conforming or conforming aircraft, right? From GA aircraft they're leveraging to test route structures that they'd like to fly. So we've started putting together this modeling and sim environment, and we'll start to engage our workforce to help understand what airspace impacts they're going to have. And at the end of the day, we get a lot of data, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of recommendations. Now we can go out and engage the community with as well. And then just to highlight on the next slide is we are partnering to safely integrate these vehicles as across various agencies. So we're working hand in hand with NASA. We're working hand in hand with the Air Force and DoD overall, and we're bringing this into the fold to make sure we have a unified approach, because we do know it's a lot of work from all different aspects. And then the last slide here is just really, next slide please, one more. And this is just sort of giving you highlights into our test and planning approach, right? From a strategic perspective, we have the ability to be strategic in how we execute these sort of near-term integration efforts as we come into entry into service. We have an overarching test master plan that's providing this test approach across all of our lines of business within the FAA to support test events. As I mentioned before, this is a cross line of business activity. The I-28 teams and the I teams are executing towards various requirements to collect information to inform policy, standards, regs, and overall NASA integration. And then we know there needs to be some guidance, right? So we want to provide baseline documents to drive us into asking for particular sets of data. There's been a lot of times we've gotten feedback of, what do you mean you're looking for operational data? What are the specifics, right? We're using this approach to be a little bit more specific of what we mean by specifics of operational data. And then it's dynamic, right? And that's where I mentioned we're going to continue updating these living documents as we move forward, as we learn these lessons. We don't want to have to wait 8 years before there's another update, right? This is a dynamic environment, and we want to be dynamic and collaborative in that process.
So Praveen, let me just jump in here and put stuff and give your voice a break for a second. So I think there's a pivotal moment right here that we have. So we have put some things in place. We've got regulatory actions that are working their way through for the applicants, for the SR, for awaiting some of the airport actions that need to happen. We've got work that's ongoing. We saw towards the end 24, aiming towards 25. When we put together the implementation plan last year, you saw a generic integrated master schedule that had all the kinds of activities, which had a large range of times it would take to complete those kinds of activities. In this moment in time, even though we may not have a fine point on, exactly what the performance characteristics of something are, or exactly, what the route or what the approval is going to be, we have a moment while we're working through all those things to actually sit down and start trying things out virtually, right? We have modeling and sim capability. We've got the starting point for what NASA has done to sort of give us a scope of the art of the possible. We know that vertiport companies, we know that applicants, we know that communities, they're all looking at ideas of what they think that things can fit together. But right now they're being discussed in sort of little pockets of things. We have the opportunity to start putting those things on the table for, virtually. And there's a little bit of a freeze in the moment, I think, of people thinking, well, I don't know the exact answer. I don't know exactly the data point that's going to be the right answer in the future, so I'm afraid to do anything. But if I just use sort of the one example of, why do we do tabletops for emergency situations, right? And so we sort of practice and sort of see what it looks like. I don't know exactly what crisis is actually going to hit me, but I'm better off having gone through the process than if it hit me cold. So we have a period of time right now in the next fall of this work where folks can come to the table and really start pulling these things apart together, right, and doing some learning here. And the one thing I would really ask of the AAAC community is to really advocate for that work here. I think that we've done a lot of work to prepare the ground. I don't think we have all the answers. I don't think that we could have all the answers because it's going to take every one of these stakeholders to get together and say, this is how something could work at this location, right? But I don't want to waste this year. So this is really my call to action to say, we're ready to step up and do it.
Yeah, it's a question, but in large part, it's a comment based on. That's excellent to hear, Jessica, because when I go through this, Mike and I were whispering to each other that the intent continues to be, at least in this, I'm going to focus on the airport, I'm going to focus on the airport operator, and there is a huge portion of the business, commercial business, that's not being accounted for. And we work with virtually all of the OEMs that are looking for where they can stitch together networks. Just flying into an airport, where the heck are they flying from? 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be another airport. So I encourage you guys, and we're happy to participate in the tabletop with some of the things we discussed, that you don't just focus on the NAS integration as it relates to airport X, airport Y, or airport Z. It's got to be non-traditional. And quite honestly, I think when me and others, we're just not the only one, we look for those opportunities where they are much more easy to integrate into the NAS than flying right into the middle of DFW Airport or JFK. So there are opportunities that I just hope by this presentation aren't missed because there's a larger scope than just airport to airport.
Yeah, and I think even in the modeling and sim world, we're starting to account for some of those things, but we'd love feedback, right, and understanding what that environment looks like.
It's good to get the concept of use case there.
Yeah, so let me take 2 more questions. Oh, okay. Well, first of all, the MOU signed between FAA and airport is really wonderful. But it is my understanding that the DoD just started about 6 months ago. They're trying to integrate all the UAV's operations. And pretty soon, I think it will be beneficial to share a lot of these data, such as natural disasters and emergency response and all that. And my concern is, airports is wonderful, but airport is really, for the DoD point of view, they are not the operational lead. And so I feel like this is a really golden opportunity for us to form another task force, a task group, to explore the DoD collaboration for our own benefit, our own UAVs. I just feel like this is
Let's start with business cards, if you want to pass them over, people that you know are DoD, so we have the conversation, because we agree, the operational parts of the mission are a great place, because they are spending billions of dollars towards advancing these capabilities.
So Army is key player.
All right, we'll take one more question, Kenji, and then we'll want to go ahead and move on, so please, go short.
Sure. I'll make my question very short. The question that I have was, there's a lot of focus on eVTOLs, especially in this presentation. And I'm wondering from the perspective of utilizing airports, there's been a lot of conversations around regional air mobility as well as cargo mobility. And have you done work on more the fixed wing electric aircraft? Because one of the things that Administrator Whitaker said when we presented before us is, hey, one of the first easiest ones to hit is fixed wing electric aircraft, and I'm wondering if that falls under a separate program or whether it's under consideration in Innovate 28.
No, I think it is very much in consideration under Innovate 28 and I-28, right? It's leading to 2028 integration efforts, right? So folks like Merlin Labs and X-Wing, these are all folks we're regularly engaged with and working with in order for us to get to this level of entry service. And regional air mobility is very much in consideration for all of these things we mentioned. So it's good feedback. Maybe we need to make it a little bit more apparent in our slides, but we'll take that as good feedback.
Perfect. Thank you.
Raveen, thank you so much. As you all know, I think it's been 3 meetings now that we've had Innovate 28 really kind of come and give us an update on things going on. It's been very beneficial, particularly with some of the recent taskings. And so certainly appreciate the time that Jesse and your team and everybody just kind of working together to kind of keep us informed. So hopefully we kind of keep this kind of dialogue going because it'll be here before we know it. And I think certainly this group of subject matter experts being able to understand, communicate, get connected in other ways outside of this venue is very beneficial. So thank you.
Thank you, Raveen. We're going to move on to our next agenda item. Will be the introduction of our 2 new taskings from the FAA to the AAAC. And first introduction is going to be by Chris Hope. He's the Acting Deputy Director for the Office of Safety Standards. So Chris, go ahead.
Thanks, Gary. Can everybody hear me okay? I didn't want to stand up there, but I can if it's, my wife always tells me very loud, so I'll take that as a yes. So this tasking is essentially the, similar to what we did in the Next Gen Advisory Committee with the minimum capabilities list or MCL. So what we've seen and experienced, with Next Gen, with other sort of national initiatives, is one of the limitations that we run into, one of the challenges has been this mixed equipment or mixed capabilities. So the proposal is to, again, go to the ACT members here for forming a task force or a group to look at what it could look like for a minimum capabilities type list for advanced air mobility. eVTOL type airplanes or any type of electric airplanes that are new entrants into the mass. The things we were thinking about were some capabilities around typical things like communication, navigation, surveillance. Of course, surveillance, ADSB is one of the, rule for certain classes of airspace that might be something that's a little bit easier to look at. But some of those other capabilities with navigation as well. And then finally, another topic that would be considered in this group possibly would be safety systems. The type of safety systems that are typically required for Part 121 operations or Part 135 operations, and where that might fit in for this particular. So again, for one of the things that we've seen, mixed equipage is almost, a given in some certain extent. But it's always going to be something that is going to be challenged, and the more that we can kind of homogenize the fleet, make it the same, I think you're going to have a much better chance of integrating quicker, safer, and more efficient. And there was a comment that was made, I think, in the infrastructure group, in the previous hour, that talked about, another area that's kind of near and dear to me, instrument flight procedures and procedures in general for flight aircraft. This, I think, is something that certainly can influence that or inform that as well. Again, the types of capabilities that are going to be available and required, at least highly encouraged to be on these aircraft, and make, again, those integration of those new types of procedures much more easier.
Chris, any questions? Can I give a motion from AAAC to accept tasking 24-1, provide recommendations on minimum capabilities list?
So we'll move.
Second. Any objections to accepting tasking 24-1? All right, hearing no objections, this motion is passed. Accepting 24-1, provide recommendations on minimal capabilities list. We'll now move on into the introduction of the second debate task.
Okay, the second tasking is artificial intelligence.
Can we go to next slide, please?
From DOT that will be joining me to assist in the introduction of this task and answering any questions. This task is the result of an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. The AAAC was identified as one of 3 advisory committees under the department that was designated to provide advice on the safe and responsible use of AI in transportation. As we know, AI is being used in many different sectors to include transportation. So we're looking at how can we address some of those challenges and mitigate some of those risks with drone integration on the front end. We understand that this is going to be a big and complex task, so we're not going to ask for a brief out on the next AAAC meeting. We're going to look to defer this to probably October. And I'm sure if we need more time, we'll be able to accommodate that. But we're not looking for anything back before October. Next slide, please. There are 8 principles that kind of outline what this task should cover. I'm not going to read them to you, they're listed there. But you can certainly, Dr. M should go into more detail. But the bottom line is that we know that AI, there's been a lot of conversation on what AI is going to look like in the AAM world, but certainly we feel like that starting the use of AI with drones is something that can be transferred over into AAM at a later date. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Amsh for additional comments.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, and hopefully you guys can hear me. Thanks to the AAAC group and everyone. My name is Robert Hampshire. I lead the Office of Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology, and also the Chief Science Officer for the Department DOT. Like Jeffrey mentioned, this is a tasking that comes from a presidential executive order on AI, the safe and responsible use of AI. We know particularly AI, the pace of innovation has been quickening over the last couple years, particularly driven by increasingly accessible and affordable computing power and some breakthroughs in algorithms. You've seen that with like NVIDIA stock and everything. So the hardware and all the computation is lining up here to accelerate a lot of AI, particularly of the generative sort. We know that these emerging applications in the last few years have really enabled advancements in capabilities, particularly things in pattern recognition, that's in speech, images, and video, many other forms, as well as the most excitement and attentions around the generative tools, able to creating words, images, media in a way that's sort of out of sample, meaning they can kind of generate these not just strictly based on the input data. But we know also in transportation, like a lot of other sectors, have already adopted AI-based applications. That's certainly true in aviation. We know a lot of the attention has been paid to things like within AI, things like automated driving. But we know that there's a lot of other use cases that are on the ground right now in transportation, things like traffic signal control, asset management, but also we're here talking about AAM. And so I think this group is really one that we would love to hear from, the expertise about what are some of the great opportunities to leverage some of these groundbreaking technologies, but what are the risks that we should be on the lookout for. But more than that, in the charge, Jeffrey, we can kind of dig into, what are some of the specific guidance that this committee may have for the department? What are particularly existing guidance that might need to be repurposed or readapted, or other types of practices that we need to put in place? So maybe I'll stop there, and I know there's probably lots of questions and conversations here, but this is a big tasking. I encourage you and thank you on behalf of the president. This is a presidential executive order to take this on, and so I'll turn it back to the room.
I think this is jumping in. So I think this is brilliant. Dr. Hampshire, I think you'd be in agreement. We need to define AI. The way it's used, the way that those two letters are used. And then when you listen to people talk about their version or their view of AI, it's in fact not AI. It can be autonomy, it can be a bunch of different things. We need to define asking specifically what are we talking about in terms of AI. Because I'm doing some work with the Flight Safety Foundation. They've also started with the definition as it relates to the tasking. And if we get off on this nomenclature that's AI and we're not all aligned to what the constituents of what we're talking about is or are, our recommendations are flawed from the get-go. So I think there needs to be some time to put into that before the tasking kicks off.
Let me thank you. That's a great point. I know every time conversation like AI is like, what are we talking about? And then you go in circles. You know, one thing I do want to, this group, the presidential executive order defines AI. Encourage this group to start with that definition, and in fact points to NIST. NIST has there again the definition of AI as it in subcategories, and I encourage the group to use those pre-established definitions already to sort of cut out some time in machinations about what AI is.
Yeah.
So we can provide that to this group, and it's in because the executive order and also NIST AI framework.
Thanks, Dr.
Yes, so Dr. Hampshire, I would totally agree with that. I think there's definitions, but there's also like a taxonomy of all the various types of forms that we need to sort of socialize. One question is, you know, in the world of aviation, you know, looking at what FAA does versus what the DoD does, people use the term autonomy, and there's also the term AI-enabled autonomy. And the question I really have is that we've been mentioning the world of AAM, but also the large commercial aircraft. There is a trend to be looking at the use of autonomy to go from 2 pilots down to 1 pilot. And so my understanding right now is the FAA is very strict about that there will be no quote unquote use of artificial intelligence. This will be a deterministic autonomous system. But my question to you, Dr. Hampshire, should we be thinking also about the use of some AI that would be able to enhance or enable autonomy if you, let's say, you went from 2 pilots down to 1 pilot, you know, and the use of AI in a very controlled, you know, environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll certainly be deferring to my FAA colleagues on the 1 to 2 pilot question. I won't get into that. But I will say though that here AI doesn't necessarily mean autonomy.
Right, that's right, absolutely.
There's so much AI application and use of AI that has nothing to do with automated or autonomy. So let's keep that. So certainly that's in scope.
Again, great question, but let's kind of come back to this task. We can go over, right? So this specific task is for this particular community. And I do want to say one question because there's going to be a lot of research and opportunity to have it. That's where, and I hope this bigger, is where we want to kind of hash that out. So this is really just an introduction of the task. I'm not going to solve anything here. It's really just to kind of introduce this conversation. But I will say one more question.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I agree with what was said, and we can, you know, refine the problem statement. But I think in the tasking, it was very specific about integration of drones into UAS.
Yes.
Is that the very specific context we're looking at?
Yes.
Or is that a little broader than, can we think about UAMs and not just drones?
Or advanced aviation. I was thinking
I think
advanced aviation.
Yeah. So is that very specific to drones, or is there more to it?
This task is specific to drones. Well, I've said in the introduction here is that we know that there's been a lot of conversation around AI in the AAM world. What we're thinking is that this would be the beginning phase of the crawl stage, using it with drones. The things that you use with drones, maybe at a later time, could transfer over into the AAM world. But for this specific tasking, we wanted to focus on AI and the integration of drones.
And how are the drones defined?
It's not a, everybody's making crazy up to 20 pounds.
All right, so with that, I'm gonna close the questions at this time, and I'm gonna ask for a motion for AAAC to accept tasking at 24-2, to provide recommendations on artificial intelligence, to the, and second. Thank you. Any objections to accepting tasking 24-2? Okay, hearing no objections, the motion is passed. We'll accept this task and provide recommendations on our consultants drones to the FAA. And again, this is a wonderful conversation. First of all, I think it's an honor that we're one of 3 advisory groups in the country. Yeah. And so that really is a compliment to this team and leverage and everything else that you all bring to the table. Confidence that they has that will do just that. So this type of figure and conversation, if you're interested in being part of either of these communities, I've already got some folks in mind. Let me know. And if you're interested in leadership, let me know as well, and we'll circle back. So with that, we're going to move on to new business. And as part of that new business, I did ask Jazz, this kind of deals on some of the more ID stuff from a perspective. So Jazz, I'll turn it over to you. This is a, what do you want to call it, Jazz? Insight?
Implementing remote ID.
Okay, there you go. And so it's kind of new business opportunity in general. And then we'll see if there's any other new business that the
We want to say slide, so next slide. Next slide, please. It's a rare time at this event, you can do some show and tell. I'm gonna pass around modules that are available in the market, just so you can kind of see size and just kind of see what it takes to enable them. I'll just pass them around here. Yeah. Pass them around, turn around them.
Guys, if you could for the committee, just kind of tee up high level what's to watch.
Are these working, by the way? For somebody, it actually worked too.
Okay, you might not get them back.
That's okay. I know who to build. Can you give us a slide?
I'm compliant right now.
So, we're gonna go through, so my presentation is really about implementing remote ID. And so on the front lines of how we're installing it and what we've learned from it, just so you understand how to really build an ecosystem around remote ID. Look, remote ID we've been waiting a long time for remote ID. So we're really thankful that the FAA spent all the time to build, and national regulations, a lot of work. So thank you to the FAA for that. Really appreciate that. And then also the DAC and AAAC has contributed over the years. I think it's really it's a great outcome to something that started as an idea many, many years ago. And now it's here, right? So it's fascinating. I'm going to do a quick demo, a really quick demo. We're going to do a video. We have little technical issues on the video side. So I'm just going to show you how fast remote ID actually works. So there's a bunch of apps that are available out there to go ahead and actually implement remote ID. We've been doing remote ID for many, many years in many other ways, protecting the last 4 World Series, a lot of events. We're the guys who don't get to watch the game. We're just nervous, hoping the drone doesn't come into the game. But we've been waiting for this for a very long time, and we've had a lot of experience implementing these systems. But these apps are everywhere. There's multiple apps coming out every day that can detect the drones themselves. This is just a module. It's not going to get GPS locked because we're inside. But in the US, you don't have to register the actual module. You just buy it, you charge it, stick it on your drone, and you turn it on. And the second you turn it on, you can see my screen here, the second you turn it on, it's on. So every 37 milliseconds, it's broadcasting an identifier. So it comes on right away. You can set your own names for each one of the beacons if you have multiple models like we do. But that's how easy remote ID is. You just mount it on your drone if you're going to mount it on there. Some folks use Velcro. It all depends on how aggressive you're going to be flying, but and GHB too as well. But that's it. Like that's essentially the demo I wanted to give on remote ID. How easy it is. Let's talk about the ecosystem.
What's the cost?
Yeah, I think they're about $50 these units, $50-$60. They're on Amazon. You can buy them all over the place. They're getting cheaper every day. Next slide, please. Slide 2.
Does it matter on the size of the drone?
It does, and if you look at the little card I'm passing around, you'll see different sizes. So FPV drones are really lightweight. We want a tiny beacon, is Bluetooth only. And the bigger drones want the Wi-Fi beacons because they can transmit further. And I'm going to go through each one of the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these beacons. I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to talk about the anatomy of a remote ID system. If you have a city you want to cover and understand where all the drone traffic is, what do you need to do that? So next slide, please. So this is the anatomy of a remote ID system. There's the transmitters themselves, and the transmitters come in two formats. So most of the drones out there are just going to basically update their existing software. So this drone is basically a flying Wi-Fi access point. That's what it is, a remote controlled Wi-Fi version of it. What they're doing is with these software updates, they're just adding another identifier. I'll explain that in a minute. The receivers come in two formats: mobile, it's a cell phone receiver, and there are fixed receivers. You set them on buildings, they're powered by network equipment. And then there are databases. You get a lot of drones. I'll show you how many drones we see in New York City. It's mind-blowing. But you have to save all that information so that you can actually go ahead and interrogate it, look at it, and figure out what your trends are. You're going to put signage up in the city, where should you put signs up to not fly a drone? And visualization is really important too, because knowing how a drone is flying. So when we're protecting baseball games, a drone that's on the outside of the stadium, well, we're just taking pictures. One that's flying directly into the stadium, big difference. So understanding the flight paths are very important as well. Next slide, please. So on the transmitter side, these drones themselves, most of them, and I say 70 to 80% of them, are just going to do software updates. They're going to transmit a beacon. Don't put anything on it. It's already transmitted. The remote IDs themselves are just an actual firmware update that's on the actual computer, on the actual drone itself. So you don't have to do anything. The greatest thing about these firmware updates are they don't add any extra weight to a drone. They don't add any extra power requirements. They just work very long range because they're using the existing antennas that are on the drones themselves. So this is choice one that you can have that. If you've got an older drone or a custom-made drone that doesn't have a standardized operating system, and you're going to go to a GPS module. One of these modules, there's tons of them coming out, but you're just going to go to a module that does either Wi-Fi and or Bluetooth. It'll have both. The smaller ones are usually Bluetooth because the Wi-Fi chipset requires more power and it's a bigger chip. Now, some of them come wired, or you charge them up and they fly for 3 hours. You don't really need more than 3 or 4 hours of motion, most missions. Next slide, please. So those are the actual transmitters. The receivers, there's the mobile versions and there's the stationary. The mobile versions, and you discover this when you play with them, the mobile versions have some limitations. The great thing about them is they're handy. They're on your phone. You just turn them on. You can use them to verify. Like if you're putting a module on a drone, it's great to verify whether the transmitter is working or not. But there's a big issue with the mobile systems. On Apple, Wi-Fi is not detectable. So Apple, a long time ago, turned off access to the Wi-Fi stack because Apple uses Wi-Fi to give you precise location. The Wi-Fi access points in a room almost are like GPS. So they don't share that with the apps. So you won't see a drone that's on Wi-Fi. So you'll instantly not see half the drones that are flying because they're transmitting on Wi-Fi. Also, there are so many versions of Android phones, antennas, batteries, phones, but it's just really hard to rely on. Net key takeaways on phones are, they're great for verifying that your transmitter is working on a drone, but don't use them for anything mission critical. If you got an event, if you got a big facility you're protecting, it's not gonna work. Stationary receivers, cool thing about remote ID is that it's a standard that anybody can receive or process. So the receivers that come down in price incredibly. They work really well. They're very long distance. You can see, depending on antennas, you can see an entire city 20 to 30 miles away. And so they're very, very solid for that. This is the stuff you use for mission critical. They're more technically complex because you're taking data from a box and you have to put it into a database. Next slide, please. Now, the databases can exist in two formats. You can put them on a locally hosted system. So you can have a standalone computer that receives all this data, or you can do cloud hosting. Now, cloud hosting is important because you can take advantage of AI tools. So right now, the big trend in AI is AI service as a service. You don't have to go buy a stack of NVIDIA servers, you can't get NVIDIA blades. But you can just get a service like image recognition. If you're doing an inspection of a power line, you can get an actual AI service that helps you process that data. So if you have it in the cloud, fly your missions, you can store all your RID data in the cloud and look like AI. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. This is the drone traffic in New York City. We see in excess of 10,000 drone flights in New York City all the time. And some of them are just looky-loos, they just fly up, 50 feet and come back down. But some of them are actually crossing the Hudson. They're going across. It's the kind of stuff that happens with these drones. It's just insane. This is where I mentioned earlier how I'm seeing the difference between just standard broadcasts that are existing in the drones and when you're ABing the remote ID module receive. Because we can actually look at the regular signals and RID. There's a lot of compliance because they're automatically being upgraded along the way. Next slide, please.
Is that something everybody can see?
Oh, no, this is internal. We just have that stored data, but we're happy to share it with you. We can share that with you.
No, I was just thinking of a common person who wanted to see where all the drones are from.
Eventually, yes, but most common people won't have the big receiver. On a phone, you would maybe see a couple of blocks. You'd see a small section, but only maybe within 4 to 500 feet. Next slide, please. The important thing that law enforcement is looking for, we talked earlier about how the FAA is not going to be hiding behind a building to register it, but law enforcement's very keen on this because when they're doing an event, they're the first people that get involved. So we're seeing a lot of law enforcement agencies starting to share drone data. So remote ID is going to be exciting in that they're going to share, the FBI will share with local police. And there's big events. There's a lot of sharing of the data going on. Visualization is really important because they want to get an idea of what someone's doing. So there's a lot of services that you can use for that, just mapping XYZ data onto maps and such. And notifications come from that as well. Someone says, hey, the drone's flying close to a big game, be notified. So all these things get unlocked with remote ID. Next slide, please. That's the end of it. Happy to take any Q&A you have on the remote ID. Pause here for a second. Hope that was helpful. I'm around for resources if you guys need to ask any questions about it. But we see a lot of this traffic and data. We're really excited about remote ID. I think it's going to be a real step change to go from relatively complete anonymity to identity. People are just going to behave better. Thank you.
Good job, guys. Well, what a great day. I'm going to, we got back on time. Any more visitors? So I know there's many ideas and other things that folks can share. As always, I would say if there's some future tasks and things like that that you all are interested in, please forward those to me and I'll get them to the FAA to be vetted for consideration. You all have been excellent. Many of the tasks that we received are because of what you forward and I'm able to pass on to Katie and the team so they can vet along with the things that they want us to look at as well. So thank you with that. With that, Katie, I'll turn it over.
Well, I will be brief. I just looking at the, we've been here 3 hours and 18 minutes and the issues that we've covered and the resources that have been invested and creativity to problem solving is really just astonishing. And so I want to thank Houston for leading the group and all of you for the work that you're doing. It's extraordinarily valuable to the FAA as we move forward. Safely, efficiently, expeditiously, but not with too much speed. But really, it's inspiring to sit here and listen to these creative problem solving and thinking about the possibilities. And it gives me, and I think all of us at FAA, the confidence and the assurances that we're going to get there in a reasonably quick time frame. And thank you all for being part of the solution.
And I will just, really just kind of echo along, Katie. I hope that you appreciate your talent that's amongst this distinguished group, various stakeholders, and what collectively we bring to the table. I certainly consider it an honor to be part of this group and to think about the work that you did, and just phenomenal. those standards and manual to the board, as we look to advance new things that the FAA is looking to do. The best practices and whichever distinguish the most in a good way. And then Kevin, you and Mike and the team and what you guys did right at the threshold of where we're going next. Triple AM work is happy, it's going to be here. And we just heard from Innovate 28, standards. So they want to take that very work that you guys just presented to you, as part of that class. So the impact is real. And I just want to say thank you to the leadership. We know that as executives, all of us have many other things that go on, but what an honor it is to be given the opportunity to contribute to this important organization. That's what it is. We're impacting our nation, the FAA has oversight of all this activity, and they've given us the privilege of participating in that process. Thank you for the debate, right? It's good to have vigorous debate, different ideas, and I'm looking forward to folks that step up to the next two taskies. Again, it's going to be great. Gary, again, just to thank you, to you and your team, Katie, Jeffrey. We look forward to the next opportunity together. That, can I get a mission? To adjourn.
So moved.
All right, can I get a second? All right, I just want to be noted that I'm giving them back 9 minutes.